from Trustee Leclerc and Hawkins and Kadaffer. Could I have an approval of the agenda? Trustee Buckler and Trustee Cook.
I have an amendment.
Oh, sorry, we have an amendment.
I have an amendment to the agenda for the special meeting. Under presentations, we need to add that there is a presentation on the budget for 2023-2024.
Seconded by Trustee Cook. Okay. And Connie Buckler.
I made it. And Trustee Sipker seconded, is that correct?
Trustee Cook.
Oh, Trustee Cook, okay.
Yes. Okay. So
Now you need a motion on the amendment.
a motion on the amendment. So it's on the floor.
The
Yeah.
amendment.
Okay.
The amendment.
So we're going to take a vote on the motion,
On the amendment.
on the amendment. Thank you. So all in favor? And that passes.
And now a motion to approve the agenda.
And a motion now to approve the agenda
As
as amended. Thank you. And that passes. Thank you, everyone. Okay. Any declaration of conflict of interest? Yes, Trustee Burgess?
She mentioned, she did attendance.
Yes, regrets from Trustee Leclerc, Hawkins, and Kadaffer. Okay. Any declaration of conflict of interest? Seeing none, we're going to do the land acknowledgement, and Superintendent Armstrong is going to assist with that.
We acknowledge that we are on land and surrounded by water, originally inhabited by Indigenous peoples who have traveled this area since time immemorial. This territory is within the lands honored by the Wampum Treaties, agreements between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenni Lenape, and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Specifically, we would like to acknowledge the presence of the Three Fires Confederacy, Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Huron-Wendat peoples. We are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture while remaining committed to moving forward respectfully with all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis.
Thank you. Now we're going to continue on with our presentation from Superintendent Armstrong.
Thank you. I'm going to actually sit for the presentation. So first off, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to Sean Mayhew and the entire finance team who are sitting in the gallery here to support us today. For their hard work, diligence, and commitment to completing the budget document and the preparation of the ministry EFIS forms, and for all of their effort during the entire budget process. This was not an easy budget to prepare. I would also like to thank Tammy Meloche, who just does such a great job keeping me and keeping all of us organized and coordinating the budget packages. So today, as we go through the review of the 2023-24 budget, the agenda for this presentation is going to include a high-level look at the budget process and timelines, planning assumptions, budget risks, education funding overview, funding allocation, budget overview, funding allocation, operating expenses. We'll take a look at how the budget addresses strategic priorities and public consultation, and the capital budget. Next slide, please. So I think we've shared this slide before. This slide outlines the timelines and the activities during the 2023-24 budget process. Following the board's approval of the 23-24 preliminary budget, administration will submit the budget in EFIS format to the Ministry of Education. The budget represents a projection of 2023-24 funding, miscellaneous revenues, and expenses. Development of the budget requires a common set of assumptions as indicated on this slide. These assumptions include ensuring that we have alignment with the board's mission, vision, and strategic priorities, utilizing a conservative enrollment projection, ensuring adherence to all collective agreements and other contractual obligations, adherence to the Education Act, always including a provision for the director's contingency so that we can always support any unanticipated expenditures, always being thoughtful and responsible in the use of resources, and always submitting a compliant budget, including the use of accumulated surplus, but only as needed. So in the next few slides, we are going to be talking about risks and opportunities in the budget. Because the budget is prepared in advance and is based on assumptions and estimates, there are risks that our actual results may vary from the initial budget. Key budget risks are highlighted on this slide, and I'm individually going to discuss these with you in the subsequent slides. So as I indicated, we do a very conservative enrollment projection. Our enrollment projections are completed in the spring. They're based on known registrations at that time. Any late or delayed registrations are not captured in the enrollment projections that we use for our initial budget. We will capture new enrollment projections when we do our revised estimates for the ministry in December of 2023. Knowing that when we update the revised estimates for the revised enrollment projections, that could result in any positive or potentially negative changes to the pupil foundation grant and the declining enrollment grants and any other related GSN grants in which enrollment is a factor. We've talked about this so many times, and that is supply costs due to staff absences. Our budgeted replacement costs for occasional teachers and educational support staff represent $13.4 million in the 2023-24 budget. The board is experiencing an escalating number of cognitive-related illnesses and other absences. A lot of things now are coming through post-COVID. For 2022-23, which is the current year that we are in, our actual experience is tracking to be actually about $1 million higher than the revised budget projection of $13.3 million that we updated at revised estimates. However, we feel that we do have some savings in the teacher salaries line based on where teachers are placed on the grid that will help compensate for that. But clearly, this is a significant risk to the board. Special education, we've talked about this too many, many times. Special education is underfunded, and the board reallocates non-envelope GSN funding to support the changing and the greater needs of students in our system. For 2023-24, the funding deficit for special education is projected to be $10.4 million, which is $1.3 million higher than the previous year. In 23-24, the board is expecting an increase of, and at the time I wrote 200 students, but Superintendent Mills has now told me it's over 270 students with special education needs. And we are opening 6 new Gains classrooms and 4 new STEPS classrooms in our system for the upcoming school year. We've talked about this one too many times, and that is the supply chain and commodity pricing. Supply chain issues are a significant risk to all organizations, including the board. The inflationary market has reduced the purchasing power of our ministry funding. Prices are very volatile, and vendors and service providers are not willing to hold pricing for any extended period of time. There is a demand for skilled trades, and it is difficult to secure services, particularly in our region, where work on the new EV battery plant, the new international bridge crossing, and the international bridge crossing is putting a strain on limited resources. There continues to be long lead times to acquire goods and services, which continues to have the impact on the supply chain. While the GSN funding has been increased by 2% to account for inflation, it is insufficient compared to the actual inflation rates of 4% and the higher prices that are being quoted by suppliers in excess of inflation. As a result, the board is prioritizing and monitoring its purchasing activities carefully to account for the implicit funding reduction in the non-staff cost portion of the GSN. Utilities continue to be a budget risk for the board. Unpredictable weather, we see this now because of climate change. Force majeure events have an impact on the utility costs. There are changes in legislation relating to utility uses, energy market trends, and the utility provider needing to make infrastructure upgrades, which then gets passed down to the consumer. We continue to have enhanced ventilation measures in our schools, but we are receiving no additional funding for that in 23-24. Our utility costs are projected to increase by 15%, and as I indicated, the GSN for the non-staff portion of the school operations funding is only increasing 2%. Aging infrastructure and repairs, also unexpected repairs, poses a risk to the budget. The board has significant renewal needs, as you'll see outlined on this slide, based on the ministry's most recent assessments. However, construction of new schools through capital priority funding helps reduce the renewal needs. But the challenge is that items that perhaps were lower medium and don't get the attention right away begin to move up and become high and urgent. So it's just this continuous cycle that we're in. The board is a Schedule II employer under the WSIB Act, and as a result, the board assumes responsibility for the payment of all claims to its injured workers under the Act. The board does not fund these obligations in advance of the payments. As costs continue to rise and the complexity of work-related injuries rises, for example, mental health would be one, there is a risk that claims and costs are greater than budgeted. The board continues to have exposure to claims, grievances, and legal settlements. These events are difficult to predict, and the amount of any potential liability is not easily estimable. There are some claims that are not subject to a limitation period, which influences the level of risk. Potential claims, grievances, and legal settlements are not included in the budget due to their unpredictability and the inability to estimate a potential liability. Expiration of collective agreements also is another risk that continues for 2023-24. As we all know, the collective agreements expired August 31st, 2022. Financial terms are negotiated centrally. While some agreements have been ratified, both at the provincial level and locally, not all those agreements have been settled. So there is the potential for a work stoppage or a work to rule that could occur in the next school year. So that continues to be a risk. And then the last risk I wanted to go over was related to actuarial assumptions. So we have liability for retirement benefits that are recorded on the board's financial statements. The expense for compliance purposes is projected to be $1.5 million. The projected liability at the end of 2023-24 is $5.9 million, and there's 4 years of amortization that's remaining on that. These liabilities have to be discounted to present value, and so there's a discount rate that's applied to it at the end of the calendar year, the fiscal year, that is determined by our actuaries. And depending on how that discount rate changes relative to the prior year, it could have a positive or a negative impact on the financial statements and on the expense that's recorded. Okay, thank you. So the next few slides, I'm just going to go over briefly with you on the funding from a more system level perspective. Public education funding is provided by the Ministry of Education. Education is the second largest sector in the provincial budget. The Education Act sets forth the formula for education funding and is referred to the Grants for Student Needs, or GSN for short. The GSN is the primary source of funding for public school boards in Ontario, including the GECDSB. The GSN is intended to provide a fair allocation for all students wherever they live in Ontario, operate in a fair and non-discriminatory manner as between the public and Catholic boards in both the English language and French language systems, provide funding to maintain schools and build new schools where they are needed, allow school boards some flexibility to determine how funds will be allocated to programs and among schools, restrict how school boards spend money in certain areas, for example, protection of funding for capital and special education, and to promote school board accountability by ensuring that school boards report consistently and publicly on how they spend their allocation. Of the total of the $27.1 billion that's provided by the Grants for Student Needs, our board's portion is approximately $451.4 million. The GSN is made up of three components: the Pupil Foundation Grant, the School Foundation Grant, and 16 special purpose grants. The total system allocation for each component is shown in the pie chart. Over one half the GSN comes from the two foundation grants, and the remaining funding are special purpose grants, which we will be reviewing in further detail later in the presentation. I know you have seen this slide before because I've probably used it a million times. So this slide illustrates how funding flows to school boards. Municipalities collect property taxes, and they send those payments to local school boards. The funding formula, which is set by the government, is set by the Government of Ontario. The province transfers the difference between the school board's entitlement under the funding formula and its revenues from property taxes. So as a result, school boards have revenues from provincial transfers and revenues from municipalities in the form of the education portion of the property taxes. And now we will talk a little bit more specifically for our board. Highlights of the 2023-24 budget include operating revenues of $505.2 million, representing a $15 million increase over the prior year's budget. This increase is primarily related to higher GSN funding due to benchmark increases and changes in enrollment. Operating expenses of $509.3 million, representing an increase of $22.7 million over the prior year. An operating deficit of $4.5 million, this is after the compliance adjustments, representing 1% of the board's operating allocation. Information regarding the 2023-24 budget will be discussed further now in the presentation. So the proposed budget meets the ministry's compliance requirements. We have a deficit budget, but it does represent 1% of the board's operating allocation. The board's administration and governance expenses are compliant, and the in-year deficit elimination plan has been prepared. It is always administration's objective to ensure a budget is presented that's in compliance with the ministry's requirements. And compliance is discussed in Section 2.0 of the budget package. Section 231 of the Education Act defines compliance as in-year deficits that are the lesser of the accumulated surplus from the prior year, preceding year, or 1% of the board's operating revenue. For 2023-24, 1% of the board's operating allocation is $4,464,344. As explained to trustees at the June 6, 2023 meeting, there are a number of factors that require the board to make use of the allowable deficit for 23-24. Trust me, we tried. And the fact that we got it down to the 1% was challenging. The detailed memo that I'm referring to is in tab 5 of your budget package. The EFIS compliance calculation can be found in section 9.1 of the budget package. The item that's highlighted in red simply is a reminder or a prompt to the board that we have to complete the in-year deficit elimination plan to ensure full ministry compliance. The in-year deficit elimination plan is included in section 9.2 of the budget package. Basically, the deficit elimination plan must describe the cost reduction measures that the board will undertake to address the current year's deficit in order to ensure that it is eliminated within 2 fiscal years. The in-year deficit elimination plan must be approved by the Board of Trustees. If you'll notice in section 9.2, the administration has identified several cost reduction measures for investigation that it will undertake in 23-24 to work towards the elimination of the deficit. This slide, next slide, shows you a continuity of the board's accumulated surplus. The net 2023-24 in-year activity represents the $4.5 million deficit for ministry compliance purposes that I just spoke of. The capital portion of the accumulated surplus represents the unsupported projects such as LaSalle Public School and Better Places. This balance is reduced each year by the amortization of these assets. Please note that the projections on this slide do not consider any surplus or deficit for the 2022-23 school year. This will be determined with the finalization of the fiscal year in October. And again, I've mentioned the discount rate is one factor that makes it difficult for us at this time to give you what that number projected would be. It's also important to note that for 2022-23, at the revised estimate submission in December of 22, the board did project a $4.5 million deficit, primarily with the cost of the increasing staff absences. As I've indicated that there are potential savings in the teachers line, we hope that will address some of that deficit. And while these costs continue to escalate, there are savings in other areas that will offset some of these costs, and we continue to monitor the current year's financial results constantly. And I also want to point out as a side note, though, that the board does maintain a healthy accumulated surplus balance of $34.8 million. So now we'll talk specifically about the sources of funding for the GECDSB. The Grants for Student Needs, or the GSN, provides the substantial portion of the Greater Essex County District School Board's funding. This funding flows directly from the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Education also provides the board with supplemental funding to the GSN, known as the Priorities and Partnerships Funding, or PPF, you'll often hear. PPF grants are reviewed and assessed by the Ministry of Education annually, and they represent approximately 1% of the board's total annual funding. The ministry also provides all capital-related funding. Revenues from other ministries represent about 4% of the board's total funding. For example, funding to support literacy basic skills programs and language assessment services flows from other federal and provincial ministries. And then we also have miscellaneous sources of revenue, for example, tuition from international fee-paying students, energy rebates, and interest income on balances that we hold with the bank. So as I've indicated, high level, we have an operating budget of $509.4 million, which reflects a deficit of $4.5 million. We have a capital budget of $80.4 million. That is a balanced budget. And we are required to draw down from our accumulated surplus $4.5 million as a result of the deficit that's being projected. This slide, you have hard copies, so that's good. This slide's a little tricky to read, but it does provide an overview of the board share of each element of the GSN. As I indicated, the board receives $451.4 million of GSN, and we've categorized or grouped it into 4 areas. There's the funding for local system needs, which is $40.2 million. Funding for schools, which is $65.6 million. Funding for special education priorities, which is $86.1 million. And funding for classrooms, which is $259.4 million. This slide provides you with a summary of the elementary projected enrollment for 23-24. The 23-24 elementary enrollment is projected to be 24,405 average daily enrollment students, which is an increase of 486 students when you compare the original budget of this year to the original budget from last year. This is now a summary of the secondary enrollment, which again for 23-24 is projected to be 11,792 average daily enrollment students. And again, when you're comparing budget to budget, it's just a very modest decrease of 28.5 students. And this slide actually provides you with a summary of enrollment over the past 6 years. And as you'll see from the slide, as we expected, enrollment did decline in 2021 and in 21-22 due to the impacts from the COVID-19 pandemic, but we are slowly returning to pre-pandemic levels. I've indicated before, one of the primary assumptions that we use when we do the budget development is that we implement conservative enrollment projections. And so our enrollment projections are based on known enrollments at the time of the budget preparation. Typically, enrollment will increase at revised estimates based on the October count date. You'll have late registrations coming in, parents that forgot to register their children, people that move. But we can't project reasonably at this time what those figures would be, which is why we use known enrollments in a conservative projection. So we could see when we get to revised estimates, increases or decreases in enrollment, and that will have an impact on the declining enrollment grant and any other GSN grants in which enrollment is a factor. The next few slides, I'll go over some of the significant changes in the funding for our board. So you'll notice this is a summary of the Pupil Foundation grant, and our Pupil Foundation grant is going to be increasing $5.7 million for 23-24. $3.2 million of that increase is due to increases in salary benchmarks to reflect either ratified central collective agreements or labor provisions that we've been required to put in the budget by the Ministry of Education. And $2.5 million of that increase is attributable to an increase in enrollment. With respect to the School Foundation grant, that is increasing modestly at $822,000. This is all again related to salary benchmarks that have been adjusted and increased in the GSN, again with respect to ratified collective agreements and the labor provision. Special education our funding there is increasing $1.953 million, just a little under $2 million. Again, the salary provisions, the benchmarks, have been adjusted by the ministry, so that is a factor in that increase. We are also having increased student enrollment as we went through the elementary and the secondary enrollment. And there was a transfer of PPF funding to the GSN for early math interventions. And that's about $117,000, which is influencing some of that increase. It's tricky, so you gotta watch some of that. In the Learning Opportunities Grant, it is increasing about $836,000. There is a new funding provision in this Learning Opportunities Grant called Safe and Clean Schools Supplement, which is to be used for additional student well-being initiatives and to support clean schools. That is $313,000 of the $836,000. As well, there's a transfer of specialist high schools major and summer learning PPFs into this GSN as well. That's $330,000 of that increase. And then the balance, which is about $193,000, is the adjustment to the salary benchmarks in the GSN and for some enrollment changes. Student transportation. This looks like a big win for us. I said looks. Because we are receiving an increase in funding of $2 million for student transportation. The Ministry of Education implemented a new funding framework starting in 23-24. They are using a common set of reference standards for funding student transportation. That'll be the same across all the school boards. They've increased the fuel benchmark. I know we've chatted about this before, where it was 93.6 cents a liter. It's now $1.50 a liter, so that is good to hear. There's also a driver component in this hourly wage, in this funding formula, where drivers are required to be paid now by the operators of $23 an hour, plus 13% for statutory benefits. And there are also some adjustments as well in the GSN for the vehicle component portion of the funding. So for any capital, any other operating costs, licensing costs, and so forth. So we are receiving $2 million. Now, this funding formula was not an increase necessarily to all boards. Some boards are going to receive more, which we did. Some boards are going to receive less. For boards that receive less, they are receiving transition funding, one-time transition funding, adjust your cost structures, and that transition funding goes away. I'm pleased to say at least the $2 million that we are receiving is not transition funding. So this should be a permanent increase to the board. I need to drink. School facility and operations renewal. We are receiving approximately $1.5 million increase in funding, budget to budget. As I've said a couple of times in the presentation, there was a 2% cost update for the non-staff portion of the benchmark for operating costs. And just to explain that, there is a staff portion in this funding formula. That's how we pay for custodians, all of our facility services staff, and then you have the non-staff costs, and that's where the 2% is being applied. And then the salary benchmarks have also been updated, again, based on contracts that have been ratified, labor contracts, and we've been required to put in labor provisions as well for the remaining groups. And this is also generated, is based on student enrollment as well. So we had a change in student enrollment, which also influenced part of the increase. Declining enrollment grant. It seems odd that I'm telling you we're going to get $900,000 after I just told you that our enrollment went up. But our enrollment is lower for the original budget for 2023-24 than it was at revised estimates. So that's what triggered this declining enrollment grant. Even though we were up budget to budget, our revised estimates was higher when we updated that. We used conservative enrollment projections at the original budget. So that's what triggered the declining enrollment grant. This is transitional funding only. It gives us time as a board to adjust our cost structures. And so this funding will go away if the enrollment does not change. Again, based on any changes in enrollment that happen after the October count date, this grant could increase or potentially it would decrease. This is not good news. The Indigenous Education Grant, we are going to see a reduction of almost $1.7 million. The ministry implemented a new funding methodology for 2023-24. And what they've done is they've primarily aligned their funding to support the board action plan so that we can better support education priorities. And what happens is that boards are required to meet with their Indigenous Advisory Education Committee. They're meeting with the ministry to identify what those priorities are, and the funding primarily resides in that board action plan. In order to support funding like First Nations students, Métis Inuit studies, that now needs to be covered partially by the Pupil Foundation grant. So that's why we are receiving that reduction. There is a grant that provides a per pupil benchmark of $645.64 through the Indigenous Education Grant. But like I said, it's the Pupil Foundation grant that has to make up the difference for that. Then there's a one-time realignment mitigation fund, which is in place for 23-24. It was also in place for 22-23. It's comparing apples to oranges. So just so when you're looking at the decrease of $4.4 million to try and put that in context. The 22-23 budget line item of $5,199,000, that was the COVID Learning Recovery Fund that the board received to support additional cleaning, to support student mental health, to support tutoring supports, virtual schools. That funding's been discontinued. The balance that we are receiving for 23-24 of the $729,000, that is to mitigate the impact of the loss in the Indigenous Education Grant. It's just to help for the 1 year. And then that funding is scheduled to expire. So that's what that represents. This slide outlines all the changes in the priorities and partnership funds for 23-24. I mentioned the 16, sorry, no, I guess that's not the 16 special purpose grants, sorry. At the time that the budget was prepared, only those PPFs that were announced by the ministry are included in the budget. The ministry determines the board by board allocation of PPF funding. This is not necessarily enrollment driven. New funding for 23-24, I've highlighted by putting the yellow stars so that you can see that. Funding that's been discontinued for 23-24 includes math strategy and tutoring supports. Funding that's been transferred to the GSN includes the early intervention for math, in math for students with special education needs. And if you would like to have a description of the PPF funding, if you look to section 3.3 of your budget package, each of those funding portfolios is described in detail for you. And now we will move on to the operating expenses. So this slide provides a summary of the board's 23-24 draft operating expense budget of $509.4 million. Details of the budget expenses by category can be found in section 4 of the budget package. The following slides will provide some highlights of the 2023-24 operating expenses. It's a little tricky to read, but you have the hard copies. So, this pie chart on this slide breaks down the expenses into the categories that you'll see on the legend in the slide. Approximately 80% of the budget represents salaries and benefits, which is consistent with previous years. Approximately 2.3% of this budget represents administrative salaries and benefits, of which 0.36% represents salaries and benefits for the director and the supervisory officers. Section 4.2 of the budget package provides a detailed explanation for the changes in operating expenses year over year. Some highlights that I just want to bring to your attention. Our school facility operation costs are projected to increase by $2 million due to a number of factors. One, there is an increase in 6.5 full-time equivalent positions. Some of these were already included in the revised estimates projection from 22-23, but when we compare budget to budget, I'm showing you the 6.5. We have an increase in utility expenses. If you recall, I told you those were increasing by 15%. We have increases in snow removal and salting and winter maintenance based on the prices that are quoted in the RFP that went out in the late fall, early winter. Teachers' assistants, professionals, and other support staff are budgeted to increase by $2.4 million. This is primarily due to changes in FTE staffing of $2.3 million, increases in benefit costs of about $800,000, and there's some miscellaneous adjustments that offset that by $500,000. Occasional teacher costs are budgeted to increase by $3.3 million to address the ongoing issues with staff absences. Teacher costs actually are expected to decrease by $1.6 million. There's a number of puts and takes that affect that. There is an increase of 46.2 full-time equivalent teachers, budget to budget. That represents a $4.6 million increase. Then we have the reclassification of labor contingencies. We have to pull that out and put that into a separate line on the budget as per the ministry's direction. That is $3.3 million. We have lower grid placements and teacher experience. So that results in a decrease of the $2.1 million. That's offset, however, there is an increase in benefit costs, which is $1.5 million. And we're at a point now where we don't have any more amortization of retirement gratuities. That finished. So we don't have that in 23-24. Staff changes. So the 23-24 budget includes an incremental investment of 114.2 full-time equivalent positions, budget to budget, some of which, as I indicated, have been included in the 22-23 revised estimate submission to the ministry. The total FTE in the teacher line is, as I indicated before, is projected to increase by 46.2 FTE. The increase consists of 39.5 teachers in the elementary panel, and due to an enrollment increase, and a further 6.7 teachers are being added in the secondary panel due to the addition of the 4 steps classrooms. 11 FTE are being added for ECEs due to the projected enrollment increase in full-day kindergarten. The increase of 47 full-time equivalent EAs was partially reflected in the 22-23 revised estimate submission due to the increased student needs, which will continue in 23-24. Needs are further increasing with the addition of 6 gains classrooms in 23-24, and 2 additional EAs are being funded through Jordan's Principle in the upcoming year. The full-time equivalent changes to the remaining line items on this slide are described on pages 55 and 56 of the budget package. Sorry, I need a drink of water. Special education continues to be underfunded by the Ministry of Education, and it presents a significant budget challenge to the board. In 23-24, the special education deficit is projected to be $10.4 million, which is an increase of $1.3 million over the prior year. Factors that are influencing this continued deficit include increasing enrollment of students with special education needs. As I mentioned previously, it's now over 270 new students that will be enrolling in September. Increasing complexity of student needs, the addition of 6 gains and 4 steps classrooms in 23-24, the addition of 70.5 full-time equivalent, budget to budget, particularly in the area of educational assistance and development service workers. Non-enveloped GSN funding is used to address the gaps in special education. As I mentioned previously, in 23-24, the ministry introduced a new funding formula for student transportation. The funding is based on a common set of reference standards consistent to all school boards across the province. As I indicated, I've highlighted the changes in the funding. However, the $2 million increase in the funding, which is not transitional, it is new funding for the board, is insufficient to address the costs in student transportation. We are anticipating a total deficit of over $900,000. This is due to increased operator costs. That is in excess of what we are being funded by the ministry. So now we'll just spend a few minutes and we'll talk about how the budget addresses the board's strategic priorities and the feedback we got through public consultation. So as we've talked before, an enhanced survey was open to the public towards the end of February and throughout the month of March. It was promoted on the board's website, EDSB social media platforms, and we did offer 2 public board meetings advertised through a media release for the public to come and speak on any concerns with respect to the budget. We were able to have a media reach of over 7,200 people when we are promoting all of the budget content. And we had over 1,200 responses, which was a significant increase from last year, and it's not a bad result. Certainly we will continue to work harder to promote our budget consultation process. The 3 priority areas that were identified by the respondents in that survey were mental health and well-being for students, mental health and well-being for staff, and special education. Alignment of the budget to the board's mission, vision, and strategic priorities is a key foundational assumption to the budget development process. Student success and well-being is supported in many ways throughout the 2023-24 budget, as outlined on this slide. We continue to have investments in a full-time equivalent for a graduation coach, 5 FTE for Change Your Future advisors, 1 human rights and system equity advisor, 1 equity teacher consultant, 1 social worker supporting LGBTQ 2SL+, an Indigenous graduation coach, director's contingency of $450,000, and the total budget investment in diversity, equity, inclusion is $1.1 million. Additionally, we have 2 well-being teachers, 16 social workers, 8.5 psychologists, 4 applied behavior analyst facilitators, 5 behavior analysts, 1 re-engagement counselor, and when we look at our total mental health initiatives, the budget investment is $4.8 million. Creating confident learners is another strategic priority of the board. The 2023-24 budget supports this priority through a number of ways as outlined on this slide. We have 27 special education supports, FTEs. We have 37 Jordan's Principal Education Assistants. We're adding 6 new Gains classrooms and 4 new STEPS classrooms in the upcoming year. There are investments in math recovery and early reading interventions. And this also aligns with the public consultation of investment in special education. Public consultation, engaging our communities is an important priority of the board. The board will facilitate this through its 2023-24 budget by continued improvements in social media use and website presence, investments in Indigenous education, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and anti-Black racism, and to include community involvement. And we will continue to make further refinements to the public budget consultation process to ensure that it is a solid one for our community. Demonstrating ethical stewardship through the thoughtful and intentional use of the board's financial, human, capital, environmental, and community resources is foundational to the budget development process. The board continues to demonstrate its commitment to this through its 23-24 budget by always ensuring that there is an appropriate director's contingency available for unexpected expenditures, by ensuring our budget is compliant with the Education Act and the Ministry of Education's requirements, maintaining a healthy accumulated surplus to address unanticipated expenditures, and that surplus again is $34.8 million. Our commitment to climate action through sustainable procurement and a phased implementation of the board's climate action plan, and budgeting for staff resources to align with the needs of students and class size requirements. Through the public consultation survey, staff mental health and well-being was identified as one of top 3 priorities. The 23-24 budget is committed to this through the items that are noted on this slide. Further, an employment systems review was undertaken in 2023 to facilitate the ongoing work associated with a number of employment-related improvements and initiatives, including those to support staff mental health and well-being. And finally, we'll just spend a minute talking about the capital budget. So there are multiple sources of funding, all provided by the Ministry of Education to support the capital budget. There is funding for school renewal, which comes through 2 different types of funding. There's the School Condition Improvement, or SCI, we'll refer to it as, or School Renewal Allocation, called SRA. We also receive the School Operations Allocation through the GSN. We receive a Temporary Accommodations Allocation that helps support the cost of portables, or replacement of portables, or moving of portables. And then we receive a much larger pot of funding that we have to apply for, which is our capital priorities, and that's where we submit business cases to the Ministry of Education for major capital projects. Including carry forward amounts, the 2023-24 capital budget is projected to be $80.4 million. And that's described further in section 8.2 of your budget package. And you can see the information here on the slide as well. So just a couple of points I wanted to make regarding capital funding. The capital budget of the $80.4 million is fully funded. Past projects that the board, that are board supported, so where we did not receive funding for, include the LaSalle Public School, and the last payment for that is in October of 2023. And the Better Schools Energy Retrofit, and that last payment is in May of 2026, so a little bit more. The debenture interest that is paid is supported by the GSN. And we have past projects that we are funded fully through our accumulated surplus. We did that back in 2018, and that's why we have an amount set aside when you look at our accumulated surplus for capital. And that will get reduced as we amortize the underlying assets. And just to highlight, even though I think we're all relatively familiar, from a capital priorities perspective, we have funding for the Kingsville JK-12 new school that is scheduled to open in September of 2024. The North Shore French Immersion, North Shore is not the name, it's just the tag for it for now. French Immersion Public School for September of 2024. We have a new elementary school that will be opening in Lakeshore in September 2025. And then we have additions at Legacy Oak and Northwood scheduled for September of 2024, and Queen Elizabeth Public School for January of 2025. And with that, That's my dog, Sophie. I'm hoping she's going to send good vibes your way. And you'll be easy on me. But I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Superintendent. Trustee Buckler, please.
Yeah, the one thing I noticed in the budget and looking through it is our rent costs, like everything, like everybody else's rent costs, have increased. Are we going to look at different options for where these places exist so we're not paying rent? Or are we just going to continue to, and I get it, I get it's hard to move things, but do we have anything in mind as to what we plan on doing here?
Superintendent Armstrong.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. There's rent that's new this year that we didn't have in the prior year. There's Pass is operating in Amherstburg off a location on Richmond Street. So that is new rent that we are incurring. With the construction that's planned at Kennedy Collegiate, we have rented space because we have to relocate classrooms. So that has increased the rental charges. We always do evaluate whether there are opportunities to reduce that. I think that there are some potential spaces in existing schools that we may be able to make use of, but we're continuing to evaluate that.
Yes, Trustee Sipka. Okay. Sure. Any other questions for clarification? Yes, Trustee Kim McKinley.
Just wondering, on the strategic priority, where it lists the number of FTEs, change your future advisors, Indigenous graduation coaches. How are the numbers of those determined? Is that based on our students that we have that have self-identified, or how do we determine 5, 1?
Through you, Madam Chair. With respect to the dismantling anti-Black racism strategy, there was a commitment to expanding the program for to serve those students, although other students are sometimes served as well. With respect to the graduation coach, that's a little bit different. You're talking about the Indigenous education graduation coach, right? A little bit different in that we also have what you call open minds workers. So we do have additional support there for those students, just called something different in that group, if that's helpful.
Thank you, Director Kelly. Trustee Burgess.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks for all of this. I didn't get a chance to submit questions by Sunday, just my personal schedule didn't allow it. So I took a lot of yesterday to go over everything. So I do have some questions. And thank you for everybody who did submit questions on time and for those answers. I really appreciate that. That was a quick turnaround. I'm wondering, first of all, if we can accumulate some points either at this committee or if this is ratified at the board meeting of things that we're concerned about and just keep them on an ongoing list. Because I have some serious concerns about provincial funding particularly and the difficult choices that we've made. So I would hope that this budget, if it passes, as we normally would do, would be accompanied, you know, with a letter to the Minister of Education, Minister of Finance, education critics, local MPPs, that kind of thing. So I have some questions, and I'll just get to them one by one. Some of them had been answered, so that's excellent through the presentation. The Indigenous Education Grant. I know that this is a provincial decision. And I think boards across the province are really struggling with this because we've made a commitment in our, you know, at the board to do this. And we've made a commitment for another year to mitigate some of this, but a year is not a long time. And it's not even our term. So I hope that we would note that this is really going to hurt us because we've taken the money from somewhere. And I think there was a mention of kind of, you know, what we used or whatever, but it's a big difference. It's a big, big difference. And it's we've made a commitment for the money because it makes a huge difference in student achievement and well-being, and we're trying to address something that's multi-generational in a phased approach every year. It's not going to take one more year of a commitment. So I want to ask, do we have any plans past another year other than political advocacy? I mean, obviously, the thing that's been cut is provincial. There's a lot of federal responsibility, but this doesn't meet our commitment from our education protocol, from what we've been doing at IAC, from UNDRIP, from Truth and Reconciliation. I mean, it just doesn't. Even with the, mitigating some of the money, it just doesn't. So, what are we going to do?
Superintendent Armstrong.
We may have different answers. Superintendent Armstrong, through you, Madam Chair. I think advocacy needs to be a priority in this, and not just from trustees, but from Council of Directors of Education, who I think are becoming a little bit more advocating on behalf of this. Unless the government makes some changes, it will mean taking from other parts of the budget, which will be a concern. And right now, the way things are working, that would be a real challenge. So I would think advocacy. I would think, but some real from people who are on the ground, I think will be really important to ensuring that this initiative is not, continued to be not funded. We have done great work, I believe, in this area. It's important to our students, it's important to our families, and without that opportunity and the funding, I have real concerns.
Thank you.
Supplemental to that, then the political advocacy, thank you for the code stuff. And I note that, I think, is it 37 Indigenous students are taking advantage of special education, additional funding through Jordan's Principle? If we didn't have that, how much more dire would this be? So I think we have to mention that because I just think that we have to have extra resources. If it's not going to come from the provincial government, it has to come from somewhere. Well, if not from the Ministry of Education, it has to come from somewhere, just like we use Jordan's Principle. I'm very concerned about that. I have other questions, but I'll wait.
Thank you, Trustee Burgess.
Yes.
Yes, Trustee Simcoe Hatfield.
Thank you. So first, thank you to Superintendent Armstrong and all your staff who put in so much work on this very difficult budget. I commend you for coming up with only a $4 million deficit, which is still a great concern to me. And thank you also for taking the questions in advance and the quick turnaround time in answering those questions. That's very helpful too. Thank you very much. But of course, as you're making your presentation, there's still other questions that come to mind. So I'd like to ask one now. That's with regard to the revised estimates. I don't know why I've never thought of this in the past, but when you do that submission in December, so this is an annual thing, it's nothing new, but my question is, the question that came to mind is, when do the adjustments in the funding take effect? So when you send in the revised estimates because our enrollment went up or our enrollment went down, do those adjustments go back to September? Sorry. Or do they become effective in January, or when? Like, when does that impact our actual budget?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes. When we submit our revised budget to the ministry, I believe the submission deadline's in December 15th. They'll adjust our monthly advances, transfer payments, and that will be retroactive back to an adjustment retroactive back to the school year, the beginning of the school year.
That's a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Sipcar?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I have two separate questions, so I'll just ask one first. So I noted that we're now in the second year of running a deficit, effectively, and I think that's the limit, from my understanding. And seeing, the funding in different areas decrease this year. And it's a similar question to Trustee Burgess of, what are we going to do moving forward? Are there any sort of plans or I guess initiatives on the administrative side of things to try to get to a no deficit budget for next year? Like, what's kind of going to be our plan moving forward, knowing that we've done this 2 years in a row, but there's something has to change in terms of our cost structures or things like that to move forward, or we need more funding. And so I guess my question is, what do we see, not just this budget, but moving forward?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. We projected at revised estimates for 2022-23 a deficit budget. I'm hopeful that we actually won't realize that, right? We've talked about how supply costs, unfortunately, are higher than what we were budgeting, but we will have savings in other areas. So we're hopeful that it won't be 2 years in a row, but without the year-end discount rate, it does make things difficult to project. But in terms of the current year, when we did this budget, we started off at a much higher number. We were over $9 million, and we got it to the 4.5, really without eliminating any significant staff in that regard. So I think that was initially part of our objective, was to try and find those savings through non-salary related items. But we have to address it, because last year when we did revised estimates, we did say we thought potentially we would need that, and here we are in this position, and we all know that there's funding challenges there. So some of the things that we are going to look at, and we've outlined it in section 9.2 on the deficit elimination plan, we do have to look at items that are going to have a significant impact. So for example, we will have to do a program review of special education. It is a very expensive model in terms of the way that we deliver services to students. Doesn't mean we're going to do anything. So I don't want people to get excited per se, but we have to look at it. It's a $10 million deficit item on the budget. We're going to have to look at French immersion. Not saying we're eliminating anything, but sometimes we have a low student to teacher ratio in a classroom, and we're not funded in that regard. So we have to go back and re-examine that. We need to look at the our student transportation bus operator agreements, because frankly, what we are paying is higher than what we're being funded for by the ministry. So we've got to look at the transportation deficit. Maybe we have to look at what makes you eligible for student transportation. Like, we can't take anything off the table at this point. We're going to look again, like we always do, at non-salary budgeted items, but we've stripped that completely to get down to the $4.5 million item. Maybe we have to look at school boundary reviews. We're going to have to look at everything on the table. We think things through our climate action plan, although that will take us more than a year to get through, but we're hoping we're going to realize energy efficiencies through some of those investments and initiatives that we're going to put into place. And certainly as we build newer schools and we retire some of our older schools, you're going to have savings inherently through that process. Those are the key items that we're going to have to take a look at and that we've discussed as a senior team.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Those are kind of the items that are going to be reviewed. And I guess, do trustees receive an update about the in-year deficit elimination plan as it is listed here in 9.2? Or is that something that the staff just undertake and then we get updated kind of at the end of the year?
Through you, Madam Chair, I mean, we'll revise this budget in the fall once we have updated enrollment, and hopeful that at that point we won't have to be talking about a in-year deficit elimination plan. But until then, we'll have to revisit that calculation, update that calculation, determine what's necessary and those requirements. And I think that will fall through the quarterly reporting that we bring to you as trustees, as a board, and we'll speak to that progress throughout the year.
Thank you, Mr. Meady.
Point of information? Sorry. But on these things that you've identified, in terms of debt elimination, like you can't be making changes to our programs and our school boundaries and our French immersion program. You can't make changes to all of that just through the finance department. Those all have to come back for board decisions.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Certainly, we understand that. We're not suggesting that we're making changes to these items, but we have to identify areas where we're going to examine for potential savings for subsequent years, not to eliminate the 4.5 million this year.
Correct, but if I understand the question correctly, it was, how do we know that these things are, something is happening in these areas? And the answer was that, staff would be looking at the, and sending in, revised estimates to the government ministry and all that. But it goes beyond that. It has to, there are many things here that have to come back to the board for decisions. So that was my point of information.
Certainly, and as we, like I said, as we adjust enrollment, for example, that will have an influence on the 2023-24 budget. And as we continue to implement, as we refine assumptions, we're making a number of assumptions throughout the budget process. That may make some of the measures in here not required, but certainly as we're examining these items and we think that measures may need to be implemented, it would certainly be brought forward to the board.
Thank you. Trustee Chin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And my question is regarding the priorities on page 8 and page 9. Last time we in the meeting we did ask about the parents, and because parents count 346 and staff member 895, so most of the respondent are staff, and the priority, actually we have 3 priorities. One is mental health for students, one is mental health for staff, third is special education. But reading and writing skills, there are 108. Put that in the priority, the first, number 1 priority is much more than the mental health 94 for the staff. I'm not saying that the staff mental health is not important, but obviously many people put the first priority, reading and writing skill, literacy development as the first priority. I just, and also based on the respondent, and I think several trustees did ask what we have for the parents. How about their respondent? But we didn't get any, feedback from that because we asked to separate the parents. I don't think it's so important. It's so difficult to, because we have parent guardian 346. Just to calculate those 348 response from parents. What's their priorities? I feel that the 3 priorities that we get from the survey is kind of missed. How to say that? Not really reflect the true opinions from especially parents, and also the data. We already have the reading, top 1 priority, but it didn't reflect in the top 3 priorities. So I don't know. I feel not good, with that so important thing, and based on the respondents and based on the number, and it was not listed as a priority. So I wonder if. Sorry. I wonder if. I don't know. I still want the separate data analysis from parents, and if we have seen that there is the proportion is not reasonable, why we just follow that strictly without any, adjustment? So the data, you see, is controlled by the staff member and the survey. And we did not really adjust anything about this
Excuse me,
factor.
Trustee
So
Chin, do you have a question, please?
I think that's the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I do recall this conversation coming up when we were bringing forward our report on the budget consultation at the Operations and Finance Committee meeting. And administration had indicated that it would certainly look at, for future budget consultation surveys, seeing if there was a potential to separate out those responses. However, I don't want to discount the feedback of anybody that takes the time to complete the survey. I think that, staff are on the ground and in the classrooms, and I think that they know what their students need. Some of these staff are parents as well. Maybe they didn't identify themselves as a parent, but they just identified themselves as a staff member. So I wanted to highlight that as well. And there is funding, while I don't discuss every single item of priority in the budget document, we're guided by funding that the ministry provides. And in the PPFs, there is funding for early reading enhancements for screening tools of $214,000. And there's also supporting reading interventions funding of $1,079,000 in the PPFs that is being allocated to support reading of our students. So it's not that it's not important, but I just wanted to share that.
Yes.
Point of information, also on page 9, it does say priorities related to reading, writing, clean schools, and math learning were selected as the next most important and given prioritization in the budget. So they weren't eliminated, they were included in prioritizing in the budget on page 9.
Thank you. Trustee McKinley?
Yeah, I'd just like to highlight that some of the trustees did submit a lot of questions. I submitted at least 9 that are printed and some others, just to save time for this meeting. So I'd just like to acknowledge that. So if some of us are not asking as many questions, it's not because we didn't give a lot of questions and get the responses back. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee McKinley. Trustee Burgess?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I have a question about 2 things, actually. One is consultants and which ones we don't have anymore and what has happened with teacher consultants. I'm thinking that's what it is on the staff FTE changes. But also, it's just plain enrollment. We've made reference to, at right now, the snapshot of having an additional 270 students identified needing enhanced special education support. And I want to know if that's 270 new students that are newly assessed, or they just came to us, or they're in our system already. There are no new children, arriving, but there's an assessment that has now meant that 270 additional are identified and therefore require staff support. So, and I have a question about full-day kindergarten enrollment too, because it's all about predictions, knowing, when we get the actual registrations in September and we get that snapshot in October, we're crossing our fingers and hoping that the, larger enrollment will mitigate some of these things. I'm just wondering if we're cutting off our nose to spite our face, So my question is, let's do the enrollment one first, and about the 270. And I want to know, there's a pattern now, and it's been well established for kindergarten registration particularly, where it used to be, I don't know the percentage, but it was overwhelming percent would go to the, day in the life or kindergarten registration in February, whatever. And we would know a good solid number and we could staff really well, in May without very little change happening over the summer. Well, that's out the window. We have continuous intake, and I don't know with remote work, and virtual learning, whether I see that, the enrollment's back, I see the trend, but can we adequately determine how many kids now show up in September kind of thing without us? Is there a percentage even? Because it's been around for a long time, that trend. So can we, as much as you've been conservative and everything, can we conservatively say what our projected enrollment will be? And do we nail it? How close are we to predicting it?
Thank you. So, sorry, this thing is doing some weird sounds. So through you, Madam Chair, I thought Superintendent Mills can answer the special education question, and then Mr. Mayhew will answer the JKSK enrollment.
Okay, through you, Madam Chair, the first question about how many students, we have approximately 276 students coming in to the system. Those are new to the system. The question that you asked about kindergarten is many of those students are new kindergarten students. So we're seeing a lot of the students that are coming into kindergarten with needs that our ed coordinators going out and doing observations and seeing the needs that they're presenting for us and for the system.
Supplemental, that's really remarkable, isn't it? I mean, that's highly remarkable. 276 additional new to the system that are coming in kindergarten?
And it's not just kindergarten, so the 276 are from various grades, but a good majority, I would say over 100 of those students would be identified as kindergarten students. So there's quite a few of our newest learners with needs coming into our buildings.
Director Kelly.
If I could just add to that through you, Madam Chair, is that is a trend that we have seen over the last number of years, that our youngest learners coming in come in with high needs.
Thank you. Mr. Mayhew.
Okay. Through you, Madam Chair, I'll get the next part of the question here. So with respect to the consultants, I know you see a decrease of, I believe, 4 that was in the budget. It's not actually a decrease. It's a reclassification of teacher consultants into the teacher line. Each year we try and realign positions with where they best fit in the budget per the ministry prescribed definitions. So we did reclassify a hand of consultants into the teacher line, so that line would decrease. But we've actually, in this special, in that line, we've added a consultant for specialist high skills major and another well-being consultant. So it's actually, it's a net decrease. You're seeing a 4 because we've shifted 6 positions out of there and then brought in 2 additional ones. So there's no positions that have been eliminated in that line. Sorry, do you have a follow-up with that?
Yeah, I don't understand. I'm sorry. Help me. So is it a salary change? No. So when you say you've put them into the teacher line, in the line in the budget, are they still in this building and itinerant? Or are they in a classroom as a teacher with just being, in a leadership position or something? Like, I don't understand.
They're the same position that was originally in the budget. We've just moved them in the budget. We've moved the FTE to a different line and their salary to a different line, just to align with ministry definitions of how positions need to be recorded. It is not changing their position. It's not changing what they do, and it's not changing their salary.
So I understand that part. So the other supplemental, I would say then, and I was going to ask about this particular thing, the consultant, because I didn't know where it fit. The well-being consultant, it's been such a successful program. Our needs, I would say, in particularly spec ed, later this evening, we're going to be looking at the spec ed plan and all the rest. The behavioral stuff is, kind of a little bit off the charts and stuff. And so this preventative stuff, the mindfulness and the well-being teacher, thank you so much for augmenting that. We could probably use 4 of them, though, for the needs that we have. And I say that from a fiscal perspective, not just a humanities kind of perspective, there's a lot of, aching hearts and a lot of pandemic, detritus, and staff and, parents and families, but certainly with our students. So I'm just wondering if we've given enough preventative support in assigning, well-being coaches, because that, I think, has just paid so many dividends. Is there anything that we have done, thought, rather than just adding one more, but, I don't know, train the trainer, something, you know what I mean? Something.
Director Kelly?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, that's obviously something we've seen as a very valuable addition, and certainly has been supported. We do hope that because of that, more people will be trained and use that within their own classrooms. Certainly, we would love to add more, but with our budget constraints, it really has been challenging. We do have, if you notice in the new outlines for the Ministry of Education, there is a focus on mental health in certain curriculums. We're certainly hoping that will help as well, but you've identified a need that clearly is there, and post-pandemic, it's been very, very hard for our families and for our children, let's be honest, for us.
Is it possible, Madam Chair, is it possible, since this is, I mean, I really feel strongly, from a fiscal point of view, like it's such a valuable investment, could this be something that when we get the enrollment numbers and everything else, that we could relook at in year?
Director Kelly?
Through you, Madam Chair, I suppose that's something that could be looked at that, but there probably will be other needs at that time. But again, it's maybe have some kind of a look at it or assessment around it, depending on where the finances lie at that time.
Thank you, Director Kelly. I just want to be mindful of our time. Is there any more questions, first-time questions, or Mr. Mayu, you have something?
I just wanted to add, I think there was another part of that question that we didn't answer, just regarding the why don't we budget for students we would expect are coming into the system. I just want to make sure everyone understands why we do that. Staffing is done in the spring, and staffing for classrooms are based on known enrollment at that time. So should we allow for additional enrollment, we're bringing in additional funding that don't have staffing associated with it. You don't want to mix the two. You want to budget for the students you know are coming, and that's why we have the opportunity at revised budget to adjust that.
Thank you. Yes, Trustee.
So I do have a second question, and that is with regard to the collective agreements that we hope will be settled in this budget year. So I wasn't quite sure if we allowed for any increases that might result in wages and benefits in this budget, or did we budget at current rates? And also, when those settlements do occur, are we funded 100% from the ministry to cover the increase in wages and benefits that may require some adjustment to the budget? I don't know.
Through you, Madam Chair, the budget reflects the costs that were known at the time. So any agreements that were ratified, settled at the time, such as QB, we would have budgeted actual wages for those particular union members. And for any groups that aren't settled, haven't been ratified yet, we've provided a provision in the budget. It's in the other. It's mentioned there. A provision, I think, is the total was over $6 million of a provision that was provided, and that budget reflects is equal to the funding that's provided as a preliminary provision. So the funding offsets the expense. So we were instructed as a board to just budget for the provided expected increase in the benchmarks. And then once those agreements actually get settled, the ministry will adjust the benchmarks and we will adjust the expenses to match.
It's on page 33 in section 4.1. It's called provision for contingencies under other. If that's the 6.2 million, that is the labor contingency.
Thank you. Trustee Chin, second question.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. And I see the Jordan's principal education assistance 37 FTE. And could you explain about this? Is that regarding the working directly with indigenous students? So, because I saw it's much more than special education supporters. Supports is 27 FTE.
Through you, Madam Chair, the Jordan Principle is a funding program. It's a federally funded program to ensure that Indigenous students have equal access to supports. That money, those positions are directly paid for by the federal government. We get fully funded for those additional and their educational assistance, and we have to make a claim for each specific staff member that's paired up with a student each year and submit that claim. So any of those positions directly are offset by incremental funding. They're fully funded by the federal government. With respect to the line above it, though I believe that was just in additional incremental investments in special education as opposed to a directed number. That was just saying we've invested X amount in more support staff for special education.
Thank you. Trustee Sipgar?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I just have a few more questions on the capital budget. I made note that the SCI funding is almost $4.4 million less this year. So we were at almost 25 million last year, and we're being funded for approximately 20 million. So I guess it's about 4.5 decrease. Additionally, to the renewal, it looks like there's also a decrease as well. And then we also know with inflationary pressures and supply chain issues that the cost of the jobs are going up. So really the money that we have isn't going as far as it would have, let's say, 2 years ago. And I also made note that it's based on a 2019 assessment of ministry condition assessment. So we also haven't had an assessment on our facilities in almost, like, let's say 4 years. I guess the question I'd have for administration, because we didn't really touch on it too much, are we concerned about this? I know that we have made improvements in terms of building new schools and being able to not have as many high and urgent needs, but it seems concerning to me that this is the direction that we're heading in, and I'm not sure if it's just because our board in particular, if this is across the whole province, and then to kind of summarize if this is something that we need to maybe add to that list for advocacy to the ministry, because it's concerning to me that we have less than we had even previously with all of the supply chain issues. So.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Absolutely. I've already called the ministry about the reduction in the school condition improvement because we were very surprised to be realizing less for that. So we've already started to communicate that. Yes, I think it's something we would want to advocate for. The reality is that you're right. The funding doesn't go as far as it is. Many times we've gone back and we've retendered work over and over. We value engineered till there's nothing left to value engineer anymore. We've changed, we've asked for separate prices on multiple tenders to try and address individual components to look for savings. The renewal or the condition assessments by the ministry, that's scheduled to start back up again. So that can only be helpful to school boards because I'm thinking they'll get a much more realistic element of it. But yes, I agree. The 2% cost update just on regular repairs and maintenance, let alone the ongoing renewal needs at the building, is a concern, and we should be advocating.
And just on a supplemental to that, are we or would we ever use our accumulated surplus, or can we? Because I know it's a percentage of our operating budget. Does that mean we can't pull any dollars from that to our capital side? I'm just curious if that would ever be a direction that we would go in.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I would suggest it would have to have been something very critical that required immediate repair. Because you've seen all of the budget risks that was highlighted throughout, including the potential for legal grievances and settlements and lawsuits and things of that nature. So I would say it'd have to be something very critical. We may require ministry approval as well in order to do that too. Right now we're managing with the money that we have, but we also have to be selective in terms of the projects that we're choosing. And we're focusing on those that are critical to the infrastructure of the school, that affect the health and safety of students and affect the learning environment, and that which is supported by the curriculum. We have to be very cautious. There's a lot of other needs that potentially we have to say we have to prioritize lower on the list. But the critical life-saving safety security items are always being addressed first.
Thank you, Superintendent. Trustees, if we have any more questions, please direct them through email, please. Moving on now in our agenda, Section F, delegations. No delegations at the time of the agenda preparation. Speakers list, there's no one on the list. New business, approval of the 2023-2024 budget. Recommendation is that the board approve an operating budget of $509,381,053 for the fiscal period September 1st, 2023 to August 31st, 2024, resulting in a deficit for purposes of the Ministry of Education compliance calculation of $4,464,344, and that the board approve a capital budget of $80,367,885 for the fiscal year period September 1st, 2023 to August 31st, 2024, and that the board approve the in-year deficit elimination plan as presented in Section 9.2 of the 2023 to 24 draft budget. Moved by Trustee Gail Simcoe Hatfield. Sorry?
I would like it split, please.
Split. Is that a motion? Oh, split for voting.
No, split for voting.
Okay, this is new for me.
And you need a second.
Okay, so split for voting, Section 1 is what,
Actually, Madam Chair, I would have the first two together, that's fine. I just want the last point, the in-year deficit elimination plan separated out, please, for separate discussion.
okay, I need a seconder to the motion, please. Trustee Sipcar. And then Trustee Gail Hatfield's going to speak to it.
Thank you. So I'm never happy about approving a budget that includes use of our surplus funds, so I'm equally not happy with this one. And I see many areas of important education work that can't be done because of budget restrictions. And it just seems to be growing. I have been keeping a list, and I would say that we should only be approving this budget if we send with it a strong letter of advocacy from this board. I would hope the trustees would have consensus for that. And I would actually like that letter to be kind of specific with some of the concerns. And my list is not in any order of priority, but I think we need to point out specifically that statutory benefits are underfunded when the ministry knows darn well what the actual amounts are that the federal government requires us to pay for EI and CPP, and yet they underfund us that. And just as an example, for teachers alone, it's underfunded by $2.5 million. That's just for the teachers group. And then there's all the rest. Transportation, although I had a note to ask about the gas allowance, and I see that they've made a significant adjustment there, but they haven't gone far enough with transportation, and we're still $1 million in the hole. Special education, $10 million. That's unacceptable. The Ministry of Education, like, enough is enough. Like, we need to say we're mad as heck and we're not going to take it anymore. This is been for 30 years that I've been here. They've never funded enough, yet they want us to give quality education to every student to meet their full potential, to meet their specific needs, and yet they don't give us the dollars to do it. They never have, and enough is enough. Occasional costs are just, right off the bat, we know that's going to be in a deficit position, but it's $6.2 million. And there have been many discussions with the minister and chairs of the boards about occasional costs, how they're just killing boards. And the minister has promised to give some thought into that, and I haven't seen that happen. We know that the actual rate of inflation is at 4%, but yet they've, graciously given us 2%. Not good enough. I mean, there's a real concern about goods and services to serve the educational needs of our students, to serve the operation of this board, yet they don't give us the money to do it with. Our Indigenous education initiative, so important, and yet, again, there's not enough funding. And, well, capital funding has just, that's another one. It's just perpetually underfunded, year after year. And I agree that we need to be cautious of our surplus. I mean, we have had emergencies, like we had a school where the whole front of the school just fell down, and we had to jump in and fix it. And who knows what would have happened if we didn't have that surplus. But, capital funding just isn't realistic anymore. We need to hang on to our surplus. And for many years, I've asked the question, how do boards who don't have a surplus balance their budget? Because many boards across the province don't have surplus funds that they can rely on, even for that 1% that they're allowed. So obviously other boards are either cutting programs or something to get there. We're lucky that we have that surplus, but that's unusual. Not many boards have, because that has been accumulated over many years. And we're just fortunate that we have that. And it's just not acceptable to me that that's a way to fund education in this day and age. So those are just some of the things that I've listed. And I hope that if the trustees agree with sending a letter, that we're very specific about these particular needs of our board. Because that's the only way I'm going to pass this budget, is if we can communicate to the minister our concerns very specifically. And I hope that the trustees would agree with that. And I am also very concerned about the deficit elimination plan. I know that we have to have one, but I don't like it. And it looks to me like there's going to have to be a lot of work to be done to examine all our programs. And that's a great concern to me. I understand it has to be there, again, to be in compliance with the ministry. But, I think we really need to be concerned about passing this budget and what it means to our system. I think we're between a rock and a hard place. I think we have to pass it. But I think we have to send a strong message with it. Thank you.
Trustee McKinley.
Yeah, in anticipation of what Trustee Hatfield was going to say, because we have done this on several occasions, while I was going through the budget, and I brought this up to Mr. Mayhew when I asked my questions, I would strongly suggest when we include that letter, that we actually include these parts on page 59. It's a special education deficit, the 5-year history, and the pupil enrollment for special education, highlighting just how great that need is. Because if they even funded half of the difference in our increases, we wouldn't have the operating surplus. And this really shows where a real significant part of the underfunding is. So I think maybe if it's not just in words, if we actually show it in this format, it might be easier for them to see rather than, reading the numbers. Just my suggestion, and I fully support having a letter.
Are there any more questions? Trustee Burgess.
Thanks, ma'am. Through you, I want to know, and I don't know if we need a motion to go into camera, but I want to understand something, and it's about disposition of surplus properties in the intersection of Bill 98 and where we are, and we're sitting on empty things, and it's a possible revenue, and we don't know whether we can count on it, and how that affects our capital or surplus or any of that. I didn't see it anywhere because we don't have enough details, I believe, on the ramifications of Bill 98, whether or not we hold our assets or not. But I think that has to be in the letter too, because if we did have details, we might be able to actually say that we've got more surplus, or, you know, we could predict more or have a little, predict the cushion anyway. So it's not found anywhere. I didn't see it. And I mean, it's real. It's existential, the question.
Superintendent Armstrong.
Well, you're right. We don't have any details on what the implications of Bill 98 are going to be on the disposal of properties. Based on the current components of the Education Act, the sale of surplus land, I'm reading off my little cheat sheet here. So the sale of surplus lands and buildings, they can be used for the repair or replacement of components within a school. We have to follow the same split as we do under school condition improvement, where 70% has to be for key building components, 30% for other renewal needs. We do not require the minister's approval to use proceeds of disposition in that manner. We can also use it to make repairs for administrative lands and buildings, which is not funded at all by the ministry. But we can only use the sale of surplus administrative buildings and the proceeds of disposition for those types of buildings. If we want to use it for anything other than school condition improvement items, we require minister's approval under the Education Act. And we would have to put together a business case in order to do that. Also to remind trustees that, no, I don't know if I can say this in public. Yeah, I have to stop. Thanks.
Well, supplemental though, as of June 2024, Kingsville High School, Migration Hall, Jack Minor Public School, Kingsville Public School will not require the kind of even utility and whatever support through July and August. I didn't see anything reflected in here, but our fiscal year and our school year and, you know, the budget implications don't exactly align. We make our decisions on whether to declare surplus, et cetera, in private session because it's a matter of property and it's protected under the Education Act to have those discussions. I just want it noted, I guess, and in the letter too, that the uncertainty around Bill 98, and that's the bill, you know, it's an act now. So I mean, that we don't even know if we hold our own assets for disposition in this budget year because the clarification hasn't come about that. There are assumptions we're making, but I'm just saying I support the first and second part. I support the budget, and I certainly support the letter with all the things. I just want that noted, somehow captured, and I'm not capturing it correctly, but I think you get my point. We should know. We're passing a budget. We have plans for several buildings to be surplus. We know presently what we have, but we don't even know if that sticks. One may not even stick throughout the whole school year. It's going to be a whole new rule, and we won't even know if we have our own money in our pocket.
Thank you. Trustee Cheen?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. And I have this in the PowerPoint, strategic priority, student success and well-being. And I see that those items, graduation coach, change your future advisors, 5, and human rights system, equity advisor, 1, equity teacher consultant, 1, LGBTQ one, indigenous and directors contingency and total budget for EDI 1.1 million. And it says here is aligns with the public consultation priority. As far as I know from the consultation priority, the EDI is not so pop up. So I think do we have to spend so much money on this? On this, because this is required or is our own
Excuse me,
board's
trustee
decision.
Jean, you can only ask the question on a motion.
Oh yeah, this is regarding the
Motion?
funding, right? This is about regarding the
Regarding the motion to pass the
yeah,
first and second
the
session,
report, yeah. Oh, yeah,
we're on the
this,
recommendation.
yeah. I mean, this is related regarding the budget, right? And I don't know if I have this question, so I don't know how to vote. Yeah, if you can explain, we volunteer to do that by our board, or is requested, it's mandatory from the provincial level, and why you said is aligned with the public consultation priority. Thank you. Yeah.
Trustee Burgess?
It's a point four information. So I think I understand the question, Madam Chair, through you. But EDI is not up for negotiation in that it's a priority, a strategic priority of this board. It's our duty under the Education Act to serve in this capacity. So it's not about maybe an asterisk and based on public consultation. That is a part of it. That is part of the thing we do. But our strategic priorities are not negotiable at this point because we as a board have determined that.
Thank you, Trustee Burgess. We're now going to take a vote on the operating budget and the capital budget. All in favor? Any opposed? And that passes. Now on to the third section, that the board approve the in-year deficit elimination plan as presented in section 9.2 of the 2023-2024 draft budget. Oh, okay. So we're taking a vote. All those in favor? No? Trustee Burgess is moving it.
For voting.
And Trustee McKinley second. Burgess?
I wanted it separated for voting because I think the discussion that has to happen is, I appreciate what we got, but there's not a whole lot of explanation in the binder about why or how we came to the conclusion. I defer to the discussion. It must have been hard and brutal to pick up, this list. Because what you're saying is review, meaning review for not augmentation, but for efficiencies, for reduction, for elimination. So that's my assumption, because you're trying to find, $4.464, million. So I would like a bit more explanation, if I could, through you, Madam Chair, to administration, of what was on there that didn't make the list and we've kept. I'm thinking, spec ed, well-being, different things. But what can we anticipate? I can't review program delivery of special education. My gosh, we have like an unbelievable special education department. We look at that all the time. We have a SEAC. We've got, that's constantly under review. Where it's so underfunded. Why would we look at spec ed? I don't want to look at spec ed with the view to make it more efficient. Efficient means kids aren't being served. Like, that just drives me crazy.
I understand, through you, Madam Chair. I understand. I do. I understand. We have to find a way as a board to reduce costs. If the funding levels continue the way they are, we're going to be perpetually in this scenario. We've gone through the budget and we cannot find anywhere else to take money out of non-salary costs when 80% of our budget is salary and benefits. So these are suggested areas that we're going to start with. It doesn't mean that we're going to eliminate anything, but the reality is that if we're already staffing classrooms and teachers efficiently at the 23-to-1 ratio, at the funded class size ratio, then where else is the savings going to come from? And that's the challenge. So we've identified, for example, French immersion, where we know it's kind of wonky because of how the enrollment piece of that is working. So that's a natural one to do. We'll look at that. In special education, it's a problem across many school boards, but we have to at least look at it. Sorry, did you want to finish?
Through you, Madam Chair, if I could, looking at special education is tough. We do offer a very rich delivery model. I know another board actually but anyway, they're looking at their review too. I think there are, different ideas about way to do that. And if we can do things that still meet the needs of our students in different ways, I know it's not popular, but this is something that other boards and reviewing your model can be very helpful, right? Because you start to really examine what kind of an impact you're having.
Thank you, Superintendent and Director Kelly. Trustee Sipkar.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. And I really appreciate Trustee Burgess's point here, because when we're reviewing program delivery, when it comes to spec ed or French immersion, when we're only looking at it through the lens of budget or financial decisions, I think we're doing ourselves, or an immediate, I guess, pressing budget issue, we're doing ourselves a disservice in terms of some of the I think, ways that we can serve our students equitably. I'm not necessarily against program review in that respect. And I actually think there likely are areas of efficiencies. And I've always wondered about, in particular, French immersion, because we know it pulls from existing schools. But I do believe it's a really worthwhile and important program that students have access to. And my concern is in doing these reviews, we will miss the equity component if we're only looking at the financial, because most things don't make sense on paper. Spec ed doesn't really make sense financially on paper, and I really think that yes, we could probably find efficiencies, because you can always find efficiencies, but it is a cause for concern. And so, while I appreciate that we have to submit this in-year deficit elimination plan, and it might not even be an issue if, previous year comes through okay, and then we're able to find savings in other areas for this year as well. But I do want to raise my concern as well and say that reviewing only through the lens of financial efficiency, I don't think best serves our students either. So I just want to echo that.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, Trustee Burgess.
I would enter an amendment, and I would, with the elimination of review program delivery of spec ed. And I would speak to that, what I mean by that, if I get a supporter.
Supporters? Seconder? Okay, we're now going to vote to approve the in-year deficit elimination. All those in favor? All those opposed? And that carries. Meeting and convene into special public board meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Call the special public board meeting to order. For attendance, we have all trustees. in attendance. Approval of the agenda, please. Trustee Cook, trustee somebody, trustee Sipcar. All those in support of the agenda? That's carried, thank you. This is in your binder, if anybody missed it, okay. It's in the binder. Declaration of conflict of interest for this meeting, anyone? Seeing none. New business, the approval of the budget. I'll split it for voting purposes. So the first two items to approve the operating budget and the capital budget. Could I have someone move that? Trustee Cook, trustee Buckler. All those in support? Any opposed? That's carried, thank you. And the last part about the in-year deficit elimination plan. All those in support? Oh, sorry. Moved by trustee Cook, supported by anyone? Trustee Buckler. On the motion, trustee Burgess.
I would move an amendment again. I don't know if I'll get any more support, but I'm going to try one more time just to mention what my concern is. I can't support it as it is because of the special education component in a financial way. I support a review. So my amendment would be to eliminate the in-year deficit elimination plan, the review of the special education. Not as a review, but as a financial component. I could speak very briefly to it.
Speak.
So to make it very clear, if I could, through you, Madam Chair, I support always looking at the review for special education and to see if we can find efficiencies. My concern is it's on an in-year deficit elimination plan, so we're talking about making cuts to the financial support for something that already is so horrendously underfunded. We're sending a message to the ministry. I'd like them to know, too, that we really struggled with the deficit elimination plan because we know we're going to make cuts that are, without question, going to hurt kids. That's a hard thing to say. Efficiencies can, what we'd be doing is eliminating, maybe lessening the deficit we already carry, with special education funding. But to cut it even further, like, in other words, is just wrong. So there might be something on this list that didn't make the cut in the discussion that the administration must have really struggled with, or just keeping all the ones that we have there and making even more dire cuts. It's just, to me, when we have 276 newly assessed kids in our system, et cetera, we already are underfunded. It seems almost cruel.
Trustee Sipcar.
Question through you, Madam Chair, to administration. So knowing that we have the special education plan that comes forward for approval, and knowing that this in-year deficit plan will have to come back to the board, any decisions to cut from this area in our budget would come back to the board for trustee approval. Is my assumption correct there?
Thank you. Just to clarify, the in-year deficit plan is items that we would not cut in 23-24. It's plans things that we're looking at currently to help us adjust our cost structures in future years to eliminate the deficit. Though nothing is being proposed to be changed for this year. We're saying in order to address the cost structures and the deficit for this year, these are the areas we're going to examine in the current year for a potential to help us eliminate or reduce or adjust our costs going forward so it doesn't become a repeat issue. So it's just one of several areas, but it's not a reduction or an elimination of any services in 2023-24.
Any other questions, Trustee McKinley?
Yeah, as a member of SEAC, I would just like to point out, I do not believe that the special education budget is thrown away extra money. I believe they're already meeting the needs of the students, and there's plenty of parents that would love to see a whole lot more EAs working with the students than we currently have. So I believe that the special education budget is already paired to what degree they're able to without really cutting services to those students that are in the most need. So I definitely, don't think that the SEAC committee is not already aware of all of the extras and how the impact is on our board. But really, I don't see where you're going to do a whole lot of cutting there without drastically affecting students, and that would be terrible.
I have some questions for clarification on the whole plan. I don't see here that anything is prioritized. So I guess I want the clarification is if we do need to resort to these program reviews, and that's not for sure that we do, was my understanding in the budget presentation. So this isn't a sure thing. But for clarification, before I ask my question, but for clarification, are these in any kind of priority order?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, they are not.
Okay, so then my question goes with regard to special education. I go back to a remark by the director where she talked about perhaps it might be time to review program delivery models. That's something that we haven't done in decades, and it doesn't always mean that it's with a view to reducing expenses. It's with a review to finding the best way of delivering a program. So I don't think that any of these programs, and if we're talking special education because of the motion on the floor, but I can't see any moment in time where this administration or this board of trustees would view special education programs with only a financial lens. That's just not who we are, ever. And so I think that we are under obligation to provide a plan to the ministry. Special education is probably there because it has the highest deficit. And maybe there is something with regard to the program delivery model that could better serve our students, because we haven't looked at it since I don't know when. I have no memory of looking at our delivery model for a very long time. So I'm not opposed to leaving it in there. I think it's responsible to leave it there to look at the program delivery. I think it's responsible to our students to make sure that we are serving them the best that we can with the resources that we have. But it's not a given that we need to do it, and it's not limited to a financial lens in any way, and it's not in any way indicated as a priority that we have to rush in and review our program delivery for special education. I think it's responsible to leave it in the motion. Thank you. So a vote on the amendment.
I want to make it really clear. It wouldn't be anything but a financial thing if it wasn't on this page in your deficit elimination plan. It's clear there's no money assigned to each item. We've heard it's not prioritized. We know the deficit that we have. It would be disingenuous for us to not say that we're trying to look for savings, further cuts. I am all in favor of reviewing the program delivery of special education. I'm all in favor of that. I do not want to send the ministry, speaking out of both sides of our mouth, a mixed message saying, we are so dire underfunded in special education supports, and we're getting more kids, and we see the trend, and we are, coming out of a pandemic where the learning loss has been so great, and one of the biggest things is, behavioral and social, emotional, all of that, that really requires extra people on the ground, more money, and we're already stealing from the budget. So I don't want to review it only in this plan. I would like to submit the plan without that there. Are they going to check and say, well, how much is each itemized? I want to be sincere about this. If there was something else we could add. I mean, if you wanted to eliminate something or whatever, we're at a point where we're making ugly cuts. I don't want to make any ugly cuts to special education. I don't want to say in one part of the letter, oh, by the way, look at this. We get a disproportionate amount of kids in this system out of the 4 school systems of our coterminous situation in this district. And we have a rich program. Why? Because we have the kids. We assess. We have the staff to support. I'm all in favor of reviewing it. And if we make savings and efficiencies along the way, fabulous. That's what, that would be great. I don't want it mentioned as an in-year deficit elimination plan.
Okay, I'm going to call for a vote on the amendment. All those in support? 1, 2, 3, 4. Motion is lost. Thank you. There was one late hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3. 3 and 1 no vote. The motion carries. I guess I need to ask how that impacts our budget submission.
Through you, Madam Chair, we will remove, this is an EFS form, we'll remove the reference to special education. And we're going to have some more work to do to sort out where we find savings from. And like I said, we've eliminated where we can in non-staffing. So it's going to have to come from somewhere else. I just wanted to clarify too that just because we said we wanted to review it didn't mean we were eliminating anything. But the natural conclusion from the ministry could be the fact that you have a $10.4 million deficit. Have you looked at your program? And we don't consider that in our deficit elimination plan may cause a question.
I think that makes it easier for the ministry to question our spending in that area because we aren't willing to review it. That's just my opinion. Anyway, all those in support of the amended motion.
Excuse me, can you read the amended motion again, please?
That the board approve the in-year deficit elimination plan as amended in section 9.2 of the 2023-24 draft budget. We have to send in a deficit plan. It's a plan. Doesn't mean we're doing anything. It's a plan.
Somebody
All
have
those
this.
in support of the plan? Anybody in support of the plan? I'm calling the vote. You need to vote. You need to vote on sending in a deficit plan.
Could we have the motion read again because the secretary doesn't have the down, Melissa isn't in here, and this is the public sessions. I just don't want it to be forgotten.
That the board approve the in-year deficit elimination plan as amended in section 9.2 of the 2023-24 draft budget. All those in support? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Having concluded the agenda for the special public board meeting, I will call the meeting adjourned and ask that trustees now move to our private session meeting. For Tuesday, June 20th, this is the last regularly scheduled board meeting of our school year. We have all trustees in attendance. With regard to approval of the agenda, we do require a correction for page 41. It has the wrong recommendation printed on the page, and when I get it, I'll let you know. And with that correction, I need a motion to approve the agenda.
Madam Chair? You said all trustees are in attendance?
All trustees are in attendance.
Trustee Leclerc is here?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, I missed him. Trustee Leclerc sends his regrets. Thank you. Approval of the agenda. All those in support, did we get a motion? No. I need a motion. Moved by trustee Cook, seconded by trustee Sipgar. All those in support? Thank you, that's carried. Motion to convene to private session. Motion by trustee Nelson, supported by trustee Cook. All those in support? That's carried. Thank you. We now will convene to private session. The meeting. I'm sure trustee Chin is somewhere. I'll just mention again, we did call the meeting to order at 5 o'clock. And with regard to attendance, we have trustee Ron Leclerc is absent. And now I'm going to invite trustee Sipgar to do the land acknowledgement.
We acknowledge that we are on land and surrounded by water, originally inhabited by Indigenous peoples who have traveled this area since time immemorial. This territory is within the lands honored by the Wampum Treaties, agreements between the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, Lenni Lenape, and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Specifically, we would like to acknowledge the presence of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. We are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture while remaining committed to moving forward respectfully with all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis.
Thank you very much. As chair of the board, I've decided that it would be appropriate tonight to read a message from the Council of Ontario Directors of Education. And if you will indulge me for a few minutes, I think that this is very relevant to the situation that we find ourselves in tonight. So the topic of the message is upholding human rights and restoring civility in public discourse. In recent months, in boardrooms across Ontario, directors of education and school board staff have been targets of verbal and emotional abuse, threats of violence, and other forms of hate resulting from their work in support of the rights and freedoms of all students and staff who identify as 2SLGBTQ+. These expressions of intolerance are often made by adults, including some who are elected officials, while students are advocating for their 2SLGBTQ+ friends, teachers, and family members. The hate and racism displayed in some boardrooms come from those who see efforts to protect human rights as woke culture. In a recent statement published by the Council of Ontario Directors of Education, short form CODE, directors from the 72 publicly funded school board districts across the province stated that they endorse and fully commit to advancing the human rights of students and staff within all boards and publicly funded schools as set out in the Ontario Human Rights Code. This statement was in response to a statement issued by the Ontario Human Rights Commission on February 16, 2023. The OHRC, Human Rights Commission, is aware and concerned about the increasing violence targeted at education officials for doing human rights work, adhering to the obligations set under the Ontario Human Rights Code and implementing government policy. In supporting the OHRC statement, CODE also asserted that all directors and senior staff who continue to perform this work should do so without fear of reprisal, discrimination, and/or harassment. Rarely in the history of public education has there been a need for security guards and police officers to be in attendance at public board meetings to ensure peace and civility during the proceedings. Threats of physical violence have become the norm in some boardrooms, with groups of protesters who disrupt, threaten, and verbally harass directors, trustees, staff, and community members. During some board meetings, staff and board members have had to recuse themselves in the course of these meetings as their personal safety was compromised. In other situations, board meetings were outright canceled and shifted to virtual formats to ensure the safety of meeting participants and observers. We should all be able to participate in the democratic process without fear for our safety. In a recent memo to chairs of district school boards and directors of education, Ontario Minister of Education Stephen Lecce noted that many 2SLGBTQ+ students face increasing levels of bullying, harassment, and mental health issues, and it was the minister's expectation that school boards will redouble their efforts to protect those students and ensure their inclusion within Ontario schools. The memo also noted that celebrating Pride Month in constructive, positive, and meaningful ways reassures 2SLGBTQ+ students that their educators, staff, school board administrators, and government stand with them. Public displays of hate within boardrooms and at flag-raising events will come at a high cost to the often fragile emotional and mental well-being of those for whom they are meant to validate, affirm, and protect. Within our democratic society, there is always room for sharing perspectives and engaging in healthy debate, but there is no room for hate speech, violence, or the degradation of the human rights of others. We must return to safe and respectful public discourse in our boardrooms and schools. The directors of education in Ontario are firm in their resolve to support, protect, and validate the human rights and dignities of all students and staff. This includes all marginalized communities, Indigenous, Black, racialized, those with special learning requirements and disabilities, those who live in poverty, and those who identify as 2SLGBTQ+. This is not a political agenda. This is government bodies protecting the charter rights of all people. June is a month of Pride celebration, and you will see school boards raising flags, encouraging celebratory activities in schools, and marching in parades as they demonstrate their commitment to the acceptance, belonging, personal well-being, and achievement of 2SLGBTQ+ students and staff. Directors of education are required to uphold the Ontario Human Rights Code to address inequitable outcomes in publicly funded education. A return to civility within boardrooms and digital forums will allow school boards to engage safely with the public and model democracy by debating ideas respectfully to provide a sense of security for our students in their schools and classrooms. They are entering a world of divergent perspectives and observing with great interest the interactions of adults within public settings. We owe it to our students to model the positive behavior we expect of them, and we need to model that behavior now. I thought that this message was very appropriate, and I'm sure that trustees feel the same about our responsibility for upholding the Ontario Human Rights Code as we move forward in our work. So thank you for indulging me to read that. Now I'd call on the director for a special order of the day.
I ask that you please stand. This is a tribute to Seta Ishkan. Seta was a beautiful person with a beautiful soul. She came to Essex District High School STEPS program from Massey just this year, and she was immediately accepted and appreciated, especially because she had a smile that could light up a room. She loved music and dancing. Sita was at Essex for a short time and in a world where for only 19 years, but the connections and the memories she made will be everlasting. She is and will be missed by her friends, classmates, and staff. Please join me in a moment of silence. Please be seated.
Thank you, Director Kelly, and our thoughts and sympathy go to the family of this student. Thank you. Actions of the board meeting in private session. Have anything? Nothing. Approval of the minutes from May 16th. A motion for the approval of the minutes. Trustee Sipcar. Second. Anybody want to second the minutes? Thank you. Trustee Armstrong.
Point of order. I think we had a
We'll go
decision.
back. Let me finish this.
Yeah.
Anyone have questions on the minutes? Motion, Trustee Chin.
Thank you, thank you, Madam Chair. In the minutes, approval of agenda of last meeting, and I want to, when my motion was called out of order, I did challenge the decision of the chair, and it wasn't passed, but it was not recorded in the minutes. And
What page is that?
on page 2, approval of the agenda, and there is a paragraph explaining the item L6. Agenda item L6 was out of order, and the minutes record all the reasons for that. And I did challenge the decision of the chair, but
Trustee Chin, I could be wrong, but I don't think it was at that meeting that there was a challenge to the chair. It might have been at a subsequent meeting.
I challenged it, but unfortunately I didn't get a seconder. Yeah, and
Trustee Sipcar?
I believe she's correct on that. It's the meeting's from May 16th, and you ruled it out of order in advance of the meeting. And then Trustee Teen did challenge it.
So that was at 5 o'clock.
I thought, no, she didn't.
I believe it, Madam Chair, pointed for information, I think it was a motion to amend the agenda, and it did not get a seconder, so therefore it failed. It was not a challenge to the chair. I think there was something came forward to change the agenda.
Yes, I don't believe that was a challenge to the chair. It was a challenge to the agenda. An amendment to the agenda, and it didn't pass. It wasn't a challenge to the chair. There was another meeting where there was a challenge. Ms. LaBeouf.
She did challenge the chair, but you said that there was no opportunity to challenge the chair at that time because you had already ruled it out of order. Prior to the meeting at 5 o'clock.
So at 5 o'clock, there was a challenge to the chair? Okay, and Was it seconded? No. There was no seconder. So that's why it's not in the minutes.
But I did challenge that, and I wasn't given any opportunity to speak regarding the
No,
motion.
trustee Chin, there wasn't because there was no seconder. You can't speak if there's no seconder.
But I did challenge that. I wanted to be in the minutes. I want to make a motion to
There was
add
nothing,
that.
it doesn't exist if there's no seconder.
But it was my motion, and it was ruled out. And
Okay, I'm going to make a ruling that it's not appropriate for the minutes to record a non-action. There was no seconder, therefore there was nothing to record. That's my decision with regard to the minutes, and you can challenge that decision. How's that?
yeah, can I challenge that now?
Sure.
Yeah, I want to challenge your decision. I want to.
Okay, so
Okay, thank you.
anything else with regard to the minutes? Okay, all those in support? Any opposed? That's carried, thank you. Any business arising from the minutes? Trustee Armstrong?
This isn't from the minutes, but was there not a change in the private session about, is that something? That's right. Oh, okay.
Any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none, we're going to go back now to item F, which is actions from the private session meeting.
Thank you. So this is under new business, and it would be D1. Someone move that, please. Trustee Sipcar, a seconder. Trustee McKinley, all in favor? And that's good. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we start the student trustee presentation, I would just like to, on behalf of the trustees, say thank you to two amazing young women who have just been remarkable this past year. It's just been a joy to work with you, and your input has been invaluable. I hope that the student trustees that follow in your shoes can do just as well. I'm sure that you'll help them with their orientation. But on behalf of all the trustees, I would just like to thank you so much for your contribution this past year. And Paige, to your second year, thank you so much. And we do have a little something for you. If I could just add that we're in exam time, and so the student trustees may not be able to stay with us all evening. So you're excused if you need to leave early. Thank you.
Thank you all. I appreciate that very much. Good evening, trustees, senior administration, and Director Kelly. It's truly a bittersweet feeling to say that for the final time as student trustees. The school year has been filled with many emotions for Paige and I. At times we felt nervous, scared, worried, and at other times we felt inspired, happy, and optimistic. Despite all the ups and downs, our experiences as student trustees have been one of the most fulfilling experiences of our lives. We've had our hands quite full this year through working with Student Senate, the Board of Trustees, senior administration, and our counterparts across the province. With that being said, we're pleased to share some photos to accompany our student trustee report, A Year in Review. We begin with the incredible accomplishments of our Student Senate, a remarkable forum for productive discussions, idea sharing, and team building. We've led many initiatives, including the 13th Annual Student Leadership Conference, Sorry, the pictures are a bit out of order, but it's all right. We've led many initiatives, including the 13th Annual Student Leadership Conference, the creation of a multi-faith holiday coloring book for the Regional Hospital, along with a food donation to the Amherstburg Food Bank, Random Act of Kindness Day, Tampon Tuesday, and our student trustee elections. None of these initiatives would have been possible without the dedication of our exceptional student senators. Last week, Paige and I were honored to acknowledge the talent and leadership of our dedicated senators through our Student Senate Awards. These included Best Spirit Weeks, Best Student Senate Engagement, Best Council Crossover, the Resiliency Award, Senate Besties, Senator of the Year, and many more. They were pictured. The presentation is a bit out of order. We also want to highlight the amazing school spirit displayed among all our schools. Schools inspire a sense of unity, enthusiasm, and pride among students. From energetic pep rallies to community building activities, vibrant school spirit is evident in every quarter of the Greater Essex. The students in these photographs, we have our remarkable students of the month, dedicated to the athletics, the arts, school spirit, kindness, leadership, and many more. Their achievements and contributions continue to inspire us all. We are grateful to Director Kelly for supporting our opportunities for professional development as members of the Ontario Student Trustees Association. Being part of OSTA has been an invaluable experience, helping us gain a deeper understanding of our responsibilities and providing us with the tools to achieve our goals. OSTA has also served us as a professional network to connect with our counterparts from across the province. This year, I had the privilege of being part of the French Relations Working Group, and Paige was a member of the Indigenous Relations Working Group. One of OSTA's ongoing priorities is student trustee governance and the ability to independently move and second motions. We would like to thank the Board of Trustees for consensually agreeing to send a letter to the Ministry of Education calling for an amendment to Section 55.4 of the Education Act to eventually allow student trustees to move and second motions. Further to our professional development opportunities, the Student Trustee Election Committee continued to refine the process for elections. During the expression of interest period, Paige and I hosted 2 student trustee information nights where students were encouraged to ask questions and gain a deeper understanding of the role. Thank you to the committee, candidates, voting delegates, and volunteers who ensured a smooth and democratic election. And finally, Minister Stephen Lecce allowed us to meet locally with MPP Andrew Dowie and our co-terminus student trustees. We discussed some issues facing education today and potential solutions. As I reflect on my year as student trustee, I am filled with gratitude for the many opportunities and unwavering support. My appreciation goes to the incredible students that we have had the privilege to represent. Their resilience, strength, and unwavering determination have been truly inspiring. Together, we have persevered through adversity, demonstrating our ability to overcome challenges and continue striving for excellence. To all the graduating students, we extend our heartfelt congratulations on your remarkable achievement. Graduation may mark the end of one chapter, but it is also the beginning of a new and exciting journey. Congratulations to all the 2023 GUCDSB graduates. We appreciate the superintendents for their unwavering guidance and assistance, and the Board of Trustees for their constant encouragement and support. We extend our deepest appreciation to Michelle Marcus, who has been the best mentor throughout our journey. Her unwavering support and assistance have been instrumental in our success as student trustees. Together, you have all made this such a unique and memorable experience. Finally, I'd like to congratulate Director Kelly for her remarkable dedication and leadership during the past 10 years at the GUCDSB. Thank you for your constant support and encouragement for our professional development. We are inspired by your kindness and hopeful leadership. Thank you, Director Kelly. I would also like to give an appreciation to the best co-student trustee, Paige. It has been an amazing year working alongside of you. Your leadership as student trustee over the past 2 years has left a remarkable impact on the board. Thank you. And now I'd like to pass it off to student trustee Hawkins for a few words in our student of the month presentation. Sorry about the little issues with our presentation, but it worked out.
Thank you, Aya, for the presentation this evening and for that wonderful trip down memory lane. It is crazy to think that it has been almost 2 years since my first board meeting, and sad to know that tonight is my last. I must express my heartfelt gratitude for the incredible, unique opportunity I have had to serve as student trustee at the GEC DSB. I remember driving to one of my first meetings and saying to my dad in the car, I don't know if they actually care about what I have to say. They are all smarter, older, and more experienced than me. And although he may not remember this conversation, I will never forget his response. Your voice matters, and it doesn't matter how old you are or how experienced. At that time, I found this hard to believe, but tonight I know that is true, and it is the people in this room I have to thank for proving that to me. Thank you to all of the trustees who have helped and mentored me, listened to my ideas, and valued my input. Thank you to Director Kelly for your support and congratulations on your retirement. Thank you to Michelle Marcus for her outstanding work supporting the student trustees and student senate and for answering the millions of questions I have had. Thank you to the senior administration team for seeking and valuing student voice. Thank you to my parents for being my #1 supporters, and to Aya for being an amazing co-trustee and even better friend. Thank you all for proving to me through your actions and words Thank you all for proving to me through your actions and words that the GEC DSB values student voice. Thank you for your work to support students and for supporting me as a student trustee and as a student in our system for the last 14 years. I have learned so much about empathy, tenacity, and leadership through this position, and for that I will always be grateful. Please never forget who you do this work for. It is for the students of color, 2S LGBTQ+ students, students with disabilities, students who excel academically, artistically, athletically, and otherwise. For the students who love school and the ones who are trying to. Because if education does not support everyone, it benefits no one. To quote education activist and Nobel Prize winner Malala Yousafzai, one child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world. And with that, I have the honor tonight of sharing with you all our June Student of the Month for the theme of leadership. Congratulations to Michael Middleton from Essex District High School for being selected as the GEC DSB's June Student of the Month for the theme of leadership, displaying qualities of a true leader not just within the school but also in the community. Michael is a STEP student at EDHS where he helps with jobs around the school with excellence and takes pride in his given responsibilities. He leads his peers with tasks such as breakfast club and school recycling. He helps set up and take down coffee house and even assists to run the canteen during Special Olympics. He demonstrates leadership qualities by making Essex District High School a better place by cleaning up the steps garden and preparing the outdoor courtyard for mulch. He is social around the school and in the community. Within the community, Michael delivers papers to home, cleans up garbage around the community, and supports out local Essex Legion by partaking in Burger Day. Michael is always willing to help anyone in need, including students and staff. Everyone at Essex recognizes and appreciates Michael's work and impact on the school. Michael demonstrates all of the qualities of a true leader, and in doing so, has a positive, lasting impact on Essex District High School and his greater community. Congratulations, Michael.
So we thought that we would err on the side of caution, and it would be better for the director to go to Essex to make the presentation rather than for Michael to come here tonight. We missed meeting him, but we certainly congratulate him on his award, and thank you, Director Kelly, for going out today to meet Michael. Yep.
If I can add, it was wonderful because Michael was in the cafeteria and a couple classes came and celebrated him, and he was so excited and so happy. It was very emotional, so he saw it as a real honor, but I thought it was wonderful the way the school handled it, and I think he felt very special, so I just wanted to pass that on.
Thank you very much, ladies, for your report tonight. We have no delegations, but we do have one person on the speakers list, Daniel Ablisser, and we need a minute to connect on that.
Good evening, Daniel speaking.
Unknown participant is now joining.
We do have one person on the speakers list.
Hello?
Daniel Ablisser.
Hello? Hold on. Hello?
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 Go
Hello?
ahead. You have 5 minutes for your presentation.
Oh, sorry, that didn't work there. Okay, I apologize. I come before you today by telephone because you have decided to have an illegal meeting. The decision you made to ban the public is an express violation of your statutory governing authority. Section 207 of the Education Act states that meetings of the board and committees shall be open to the public, and no person shall be excluded from a meeting that is open to the public except for improper conduct. Some may try to advance a creative argument that allowing the public to watch via YouTube meets your obligation. That flies in the face of the plain language of Section 207 and the concept of excluding no person except for improper conduct. However, if there was any doubt, OReg 46397 of the Education Act states, the meeting room of the board or of a committee of the board, as the case may be, shall be open to permit physical attendance by members of the public at every meeting of the board or of a committee of the board. So my question for the board is, when you made this decision, did you not know or did you not care? What possible interpretation could lead you to believe that permitting physical attendance in the meeting room by members of the public can be achieved by allowing the public to watch on YouTube while you meet behind locked doors? If a grade 10 civics student thought YouTube would suffice for your statutory obligations, they should fail their class. I also question on what basis you apparently met in camera 2 weeks ago to make this decision. Again, Section 207 requires all of your meetings, including committee meetings, to be in public, with very limited exceptions in Section 207, sub 2 of the Education Act, none of which seem to apply here. I can expand on that more if you would like. As a board, you're a creature of statute. You have no greater ability to ignore your statutory obligations, as you have done here, than to ignore quorum obligations. You have no greater right to decide that you can publish meetings on YouTube and bar public attendance than you do to decide that you're going to do away with elections entirely and re-elect yourselves based on a Facebook poll. In my view, your actions also constitute breach of your charter obligations. You're infringing on both the protected rights of peaceful assembly and freedom of expression. Members of the public may want to show their support for a cause or speaker by attending in your audience so that they can be seen without speaking. You have taken away that right. I can give you recent local examples where groups have taken that approach. That's fundamentally why the governing legislation so expressly protects the public's right to attend in person. The democratic principle of public attendance goes back 3,000 years. I've personally visited legislative bodies around the world to witness governing in action. The places that do not allow the public to witness democracy in action in person are totalitarian states like China. Part of your obligation as elected officials is to look the audience in the eye when you make decisions affecting them. You have every right not to agree with your audience, but you do not get to hide from the heat of their angry glares. Again, that is what dictators in totalitarian states get to do, not leaders in a democracy. You may not like the heat in the room when you cast an unpopular decision, but facing the heat is a fundamental part of the process. And it matters. Again, I can give you local examples where votes change, often in line with what progressive audiences wanted because of the heat of the audience in the room. Some have claimed that a safety concern gives you the right to ignore your statutory meeting obligations. That's a red herring, and I'll expand on that if you have questions or time permits. I'm deeply concerned that what is going on here is a harbinger of undemocratic things to come. You may be looking to bar one of your own duly elected members from your chamber and want the public out of the way before you attempt that. I would implore you to undo the mess you've created, adjourn the meeting immediately, revoke any decisions that you have made during your illegal meeting today, and return to regular order tomorroor with the meeting open to the public. You may not want to open the Pandora's box by making decisions at an illegally constituted meeting and doing away with 3,000-year-old democratic principles. Some brief other notes. You passed a budget today behind locked doors. The YouTube video didn't even show all trustees during the vote. Does the public have to wait until October until we know how trustees voted on arguably the most important vote you cast annually? Audience members can see crosstalk and body language in the room that they cannot see on YouTube. It's part of the reason personal attendance is protected. Try watching your own video or attending a council meeting and then watching it online. What you see in the camera feed in the room are different. I cannot even see the audience as I'm presenting right now. Briefly, I want to touch on the safety red herring. Your statutory mandate doesn't give you the discretion that you have given yourselves. You're certainly free to have disruptive individuals removed. You cannot ban the public en masse. If you don't like that, you're free to send a letter to the Minister of Education asking your governing legislation be changed. You simply cannot ignore your statutory obligation. If you had a serious threat to public safety, you would call the police. I would be remiss to note that you may be sheepish about doing that, given that a few months ago you had a debate on banning the police from schools. Asking them now to keep you safe might seem ironic, if not hypocritical. If the police believe there's a serious threat, the police will attend your meetings, as they have done at school board meetings elsewhere. It seems to me that what we may really be dealing with is your emotional safety by being faced with an audience whose views you find unacceptable. With respect, that doesn't cut it. If
Could
there
you
was
wrap up,
real
please,
safety,
Mr. Ablisher? Your
I've
time is up.
I've got 20 seconds left. If there was a real safety threat that you couldn't control with the public, the concept of meeting in an office building with a dangerous mob outside who would commit crimes and physically harm you if they were in the room, but to which you will be safe with glass windows keeping them out of the building, frankly doesn't make any sense. The EA regulation requires the public must be allowed in the meeting room, but allows for hybrid attendance for staff and other trustees. If you had a real physical safety threat, why isn't that occurring? I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Do trustees have any questions for clarification? Trustee Chin, for clarification only. If there's something you didn't understand.
Yeah, actually, it's not quite clear, and I didn't follow all. So I do have question. We have live video to watch by the public. So why do you still think that it's important to come to the boardroom in person? Could you clarify that? Because it was so quick, I didn't get what you mean. Thank you.
I think that was the whole 5-minute presentation.
Yeah,
Trustee
but
Chin.
that's my question.
So I don't think that
Thank
can
you.
be summarized
Yeah, he
in
can
one
summarize.
sentence, so.
He does not have to, maybe 1 minute. Thank you.
Well, do you want me to just address why YouTube doesn't suffice?
Pardon?
No, Trustee Chin, maybe Mr. Ablisher can send you an email with his presentation, and then you could read it, okay? Mr. Ablisher, could you do that? Send your presentation to Trustee Chin.
I guess.
Thank you.
I mean, if
Thank
the
you.
question is why does YouTube not suffice, I can summarize that.
Are there any other questions for clarification? Thank you. New business. Items L, what did I forget now?
Nothing, I just wanted to move L1 through L6 from policy committee.
Yeah,
Save
I was
some
just
time.
going to mention that.
Unknown participant.
L1 to L6 has been moved by Trustee McKinley. Could we have a seconder? Trustee Buckler. Do we have any questions? Do you need anything separated out for voting purposes? Items L1 to L6. I can tell you that L1 to L5 are all updates with regard to language or corrections with regard to current legislation, whatever. They're mainly housekeeping, but there's been no change to the intent of the policies. L6 is the annual plan. Can I call the vote? Question from Trustee Burgess. Your question?
Sorry, I didn't anticipate being on L6 already. I had a question because I was surprised that a relatively new school built in 2010, Dr. David Suzuki, was considered needing an upgrade for existing change room, washroom to barrier-free washroom. I thought it was a barrier-free. So I'm thinking maybe the code has it changed? Because I can't imagine that we would have missed that in a new school.
Okay, if you're asking me, I don't know the answer.
Through you, Madam Chair.
But I'm sure that Mrs. Hinchcliffe knows the answer.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I was just as surprised as you. Believe it or not, I've built schools for 30 years, and I went to that school, and it does not have a barrier-free washroom. I was shocked. It has barrier-free stalls, but the codes and the needs of our students have changed so dramatically now that the code in 2010 and previous just don't suffice. So we've been finding that in a lot of schools, and we're addressing them, even Brock, for example. So we're addressing them as we find them.
So supplemental, Madam Chair, the same thing. There is a tiny little typo too on page 39. It's East Mercia, but Tecumseh Vista, same thing. New accessible entrance and the installation of an automatic door operator. Is that to like an extended part of the building, or like it has an accessible entrance, Tecumseh Vista? That's another one that's, you know, again, fairly new, 2009, 10.
We had a special education student attending the program there, and they required a different type of setup that required us to put in an exterior play area and that required an accessible free entrance. So it was in addition to what was already there. So as students, and we deal with this every year, all year, as students come into our system and their needs are assessed, we have to act quickly and make some changes to our schools.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Item L1 to L6. If not, a question, Trustee Burgess?
The ODA committee, at one time, I remember when we were at organizational meeting, or we dissolved or got rid of the AODA committee, but there's an ODA committee, and I'm wondering what the difference was. We got rid of one and it had trustee membership, and this is, I would think, an administrative committee, but what's the difference?
Don't know.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, we do have an internal committee that of superintendents and board staff. So for example, we would have someone from the Human Resources Department, someone from Facility Services, Special Education, myself from Business that participate in that committee to discuss projects that may potentially we need to do in schools. We'll also consult, we'll review, for example, the ODA plan, and we'll circulate that information internally.
It's my understanding that we weren't required to continue a committee with the trustees. That has gone away. Okay. Okay, then I'll call the question. All those in support of L1 through to L6. All those in support, any opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much. L7, I'll just bring your attention to the fact that on the first page of the report, page 41, disregard the recommendation and follow the recommendation that is printed on the agenda. So on the blue paper, you have the correct recommendation is that the board approve the 2023-2024 special education plan for September 2023. Could I have someone make that motion? Trustee McKinley, Trustee Buckler. Are there any questions on the education plan? Trustee Burgess, and then Trustee Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Earlier at the budget meeting, we looked at the in-year, what's it called? Deficit elimination plan or whatever. And we discussed the review of special education program delivery model. And I expressed an opinion that I think it's always good to review the model. Not necessarily alerting the ministry, so that, you know, that passed. But I'm just wondering, will a model review, a review of the model be undertaken without a specific motion to look for efficiencies, but with, you know, keeping the humanity of our growing needs for students who have exceptionalities to be met adequately?
Well, that would be a question for administration.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm looking to Superintendent Mills. I do believe there is a small review, a part of a review that's going to be taking place looking at specifically a certain group of our students that was already underway, and we feel that that is something that needs to occur. As for the larger review, at this point, I don't believe anything is planned for that. And you can certainly correct me, Superintendent Mills, if I am wrong on my answer.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, we do have a review planned for our RISE program. Those are our partially integrated classrooms. So the focus of those classrooms is on language and mathematics in our elementary setting. We'll be looking at engagement. We'll be looking at academic achievement and socially, if it's meeting the needs of our students and their families. So that review will start to take place at the beginning of September and work our way probably through February of next year.
Thank you. Trustee Nelson?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. On page 99, it talks about professional development, and there's a list there that talks about the employee groups and who is getting what specific PD. I'm wondering how it's determined which employee groups get the professional development, and if we can use the anti-Black racism as an example, whereas all special education staff receive that training as opposed to all staff.
Sorry, this is a special education report. It's not a report of all staff in our system.
Okay.
So it's just a report on special education programs and services. So what they're telling you is that everyone that works in special education in our system would be participating.
In all of this PD.
Or whatever employee group is listed, but this isn't a report of professional development for all our staff.
I understand.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Superintendent Mills?
Through you, Madam Chair, and to Trustee Nelson, I believe there is a bit of a typo on that page. So all special education staff should read all staff. I think it was put in the plan to highlight all of the equity work that's being done across the board and for our special education department. And then the rest of the needs are determined by the special education department. So we'll hit our specific groups. So we may hit our LSTs, our support staff, EAs, DSWs, CYWs, and that's how our plan for PD is developed.
Any other questions? All those in support? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Now we're under reports to be received. And one is the report of the Director of Education.
Is Mr. Scantlebury with me? Of course he is. Just looking for a cheerleader here. Thank you, Mr. Scantlebury. Okay. You think we're ready? Okay. This is my final report for the 2022-23 school year. And as you will see, we have lots to be proud of and a great deal to celebrate recently. Just over a week left in the school year, these youngsters at A.V. Grimm are getting ready for summer break, when it's a great thing to sit in the shade with a good book. This is Pride Month, and on the 1st, we declare our support for LGBTQIA plus community by raising pride flags at all of our schools and administrative buildings. These are just two of these occasions at Southwood and at Mount Carmel Blythewood. This is also Indigenous History Month, and tomorrow will be Indigenous Peoples Day. Our good friend, artist Moses Lunham, has been busy throughout our district working with students on their own little projects. Next week, we'll unveil a big project that Moses and students have been working on at Lakeshore Discovery School. Last month, we celebrated a great deal of work with a presentation of our Outstanding Service, Champions for Education, and Long Service Awards. It was a wonderful evening. That sort of kicked off award season in our board. Teacher consultant Bill Fetter was honored by the Ontario Council for Technology Education with a lifetime membership for his contributions to technical education. Adelina DeBalis, who teaches at PASS in the Community Kitchen Program, was recognized as the Culinary Federation of Canada as the National Chef of the Year. What an accomplishment. The Windsor-Essex County chapter of the Council of Exceptional Children presented their annual awards recently, and 3 of our students, as well as 3 of our staff members, were presented awards for rising above their challenges and for serving students with special needs. We had a nice event last week to present the Greater Essex County District School Board scholarships and bursaries. Congratulations to all the recipients, and we wish them good fortune in their post-secondary pathways. Leamington District Secondary School student, grade 12 student, Matthew Kenny, has received a prestigious and valuable Schulich Foundation scholarship. I read about this online today. And that's his proud teacher, Julia Dukeman, and him in the picture. And Matthew received an average grade of 96 in his grade 12 courses. He'll be heading to McMaster next year, funded by his $100,000 award. Wow. I hope as many people as possible get to a chance to visit the Gibson Gallery in Amherstburg this month to see the entries in our annual student digital photography exhibition. This interesting shot of some hungry baby birds is one of the winning entries. It's beautiful. And if you want to see or learn more about many of the things that I've spoken about this evening, it's on our website. Don't forget to look at www.publicboard.ca. And finally, I want to acknowledge all the staff members who are retiring this year. We are had a lovely event earlier this month to say thank you for their many years of faithful service to the Greater Essex County District School Board, our students, and their families. And as I come to the end of my 38 years of working in education, I would just like to take a moment to thank our Board of Trustees, to our outstanding student trustees, to senior administration, our union partners, the staff and families of Greater Essex County District School Board. It has been a pleasure to learn with and from each of you. I wish Greater Essex all the best in its new adventures, and I'm grateful to have had this wonderful opportunity. I am very hopeful about what you will continue to do in building tomorrow together. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have the report of the OSPA director.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Several of us attended the annual general meeting of OPSPA in Collingwood a couple weekends ago, and it was very successful. The workshops and the election results, etc., are posted on the OPSPA website. But I would like to give my Board of Directors meeting summary as well. We held that prior to the AGM, and then after the elections, of course, we held another one, an organizational meeting of the OPSPA Board of Directors. In that regard, I'm returning as on the Provincial Policy Development Work Group, and I think there is an outstanding group of people who are in the executive who are going to have their hands full, a lot of work on the table. Education policy and program matters were discussed at the Board of Directors meeting on June the 8th. And there we were also given an opportunity to collect hard copies. All of these are available electronically, but I will be putting this either in the trustee lounge or somewhere where it's accessible for everyone. But the annual report was presented to trustees and is now available online. But if you'd like a hard copy, please, take that. Borrow that, return it so we can disseminate it if you want the hard copy. Labor relations were also updated, was provided in camera. And there have been some recent developments, etc. I wanted to say your colleagues at OPSPA are going to miss you, Director Kelly. Thank you for all your work at provincial bargaining tables. Because there you go. Yeah, it happens privately. It happens. It's hard work. It's hard work, and it's really appreciated. So thank you very much. You have a lot of grateful folks there. We were given a legislative update in government relations from Jennifer McIntyre, and of course a lot of the discussion, not only at the Board of Directors but in workshops that followed at the AGM. We discussed Bill 98, the Better Schools and Student Outcomes Act. You know, that's a very large and complex bill, and we still haven't got all the information from it. But it was introduced on April 17th, and I've mentioned it a little before, but the bill proposes changes to the Early Childhood Educators Act 2007, the Education Act itself, our duties, parameters around the job of Director of Education. It suggests changes to the Ontario College of Teachers Act. It's quite wide ranging, so I really strongly suggest, you know, I mean, even it's a bit of a cure for insomnia, but you know, have a look at that, because we are going to be discussing this and pulling it apart over this next year, because there's just so many unanswered questions, and it affects our duties and our power as locally elected advocates for public education. Oh, and then OPSPA did, of course, put an initial statement in that. And we did a very extensive consultation and advocacy plan that involved senior staff, the policy development and education program work groups, both of us. We were in constant meetings, and we got a response in, and our president, Kathy Abraham, was able to present it at Queen's Park and very successfully. So we were happy about that. The association is going to be following up regarding some upcoming consultations on joint use of schools and apprenticeship pathways, as well as other areas of concern related to the bill, including the role and the responsibility of integrity commissioners in school boards. There's no real parameters around the certification or the qualifications of integrity commissioner. You can kind of just call yourself one, and you are one. So to have somebody who has the power to overturn publicly elected folks' decisions and different things, it's hard to, you know, we can't think of any other level of government that would have something like that, that would, you know, not have any parameters around it. We had a successful Take Your MPP to School Day. While I will say that maybe not locally, provincially we did. About 50 MPPs participated in the event province-wide, and some going into schools for the very first time. So that's always a good thing. We are undertaking a brand refresh. We have a new executive director, and we are going to be looking at that as a long-term project with a goal of completion within the next year. Please follow on the website OPSPA in the Media, the OPSPA Connects blog, and the whole website, because it has all of our submissions that we've sent to the government. And if sometimes, you know, we can coattail on some of the words, you know, we don't have to wordsmith everything. We've had a lot of consultation in our submissions, and sometimes Greater Essex is, you know, in complete alignment. So it's good to look at those submissions that OPSPA has made, and they're under advocacy and action page. Of course, you know, school boards are moving forward, finalizing their budget to meet the ministry's end of June deadline. Provincially, most boards are experiencing funding pressures from underfunded benchmarks. This is a theme. We've seen it. We've heard it today. We are going to be living with this. About 1/3 of school boards have preliminarily indicated they are in a deficit situation. And there may be actually more, because some folks honestly didn't know exactly what the situation was, but at least 1/3. That's a lot. So at the Board of Directors, we passed the following motion. It was actually my initial motion, and it got amended and amended and amended, so it's a little watered down, but here it is. That the Ontario Public School Boards Association advocate to the Ministry of Education to address the deficits in funding that support the delivery of programs affecting student success and well-being. So it's sort of motherhood and apple pie, but it is a commitment that we're not going to give up on this, that we're all really struggling. There were some cuts that were just, you know, horrendous. So, you know, we're going to be advocating hard and strong. So a summary of the important B and SB memos were given, you know, the new ones since the last Board of Directors meeting in February. And they can also be accessed. So if you ever hear about a memo or whatever and you want to see the details of it, just go to the OPSPA website, and they'll give you the link to the Ministry of Finance website. Big news about the the completion of Beyond Knowledge. We wanted to know, coming out of the pandemic, knowing that we have a lot of challenges that are manifesting in our schools, we undertook this project, and it's been just overwhelmingly positively adopted. Beyond Knowledge, Preparing Students for an Uncertain Future, Emerging Vision and Priorities, a discussion paper. This is Ontario's Education Partner discussion paper. And it's really, really good and well-researched, and if you want to see the literature review, et cetera, it's all in there. So I suggest getting that. Big news, and Superintendent Howe actually got her own set. As you requested. French is a second language, or it's an additional language. OPSPA, on behalf of CSBA, takes the leadership on some issues across the country, copyright being one, Indigenous education being another. French as a second language is another area that school boards across Canada look to Ontario to take a lead in and research, etc. So these resources are phenomenal. They, again, have been really well received. French as a second language for school administrators, from awareness to action. Compendium of evidence-informed strategies and practices to support school administrators with FSL programs. French language proficiency assessment for French as a second language teaching. This is a toolkit and resources guide. Mobilizing knowledge from the FSL Labor Market Partnership and FSL Teacher Recruitment Guide for English language school boards. Like, that's a really great spectrum of, looking at FSL. It's a problem, a real challenge across the country. Trying to get and attract and recruit and retain folks in every discipline who have French qualifications and have them in our schools. The demand is high and the supply is low. So that's a really great resource that OPSPA now has. The Indigenous Education Council met and updates were given. You can imagine, as we talked about earlier in our budget discussion, what the Indigenous Trustees Council felt about the cuts to Indigenous education. They were really alarmed. So we had a discussion about that, and we're going to be, we're not going to be letting go of that one. I know that. The Black Trustees Caucus is new to OPSPA, and they are going to have their own AGM, and a chair and a vice chair will be chosen, but it's a great start, and some really rich discussion happened, and they had a meeting also at the AGM. The elections, as I said, were held. There weren't any big changes, none to the executive, I don't think. Maybe the Northern Board. Yeah, Northern Board has Cheryl Evans back on. We also talked about our work with the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And OPSPA awards were given out, of course. They were submissions. There was a committee that determined lots of different awards, and we had a great president's dinner. And our multi-year strategic plan, the OPSPA one, was given, and the priorities are student success, equity, and well-being, local school board governance, and maintaining it. In other words, Bill 98 threatens some of that, so student success, equity, and well-being, local school board governance, truth and reconciliation, and effective relationships and sustainable resourcing. So that's it. And the wrap-up is the Canadian School Board Association will be meeting the Congress and the National Trustees Gathering on Indigenous Education. It's being held July 3rd to the 5th in Banff. Registration is open, but good luck finding a place to stay. And that ends my report. Thanks.
The next report we have is about our very successful international languages programs. Superintendent Hillman, anything you'd like to add to the report?
I'd like to thank Jimmy Norman. Jimmy's a vice principal at Forest Glade, and over the course of this school year has taken the position of principal of international languages. So he's transitioned and will be leading our program next year. This is the most students we've ever had in person in the program. So we continue to grow almost 40% total over the course of the last 5 years. Any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Any questions on the report? Seeing none, thank you very much. The GECPIC report you have included in your package. The chair isn't here for that, but you have her report. Are there any questions that maybe Mr. or Superintendent Hillman could help you with? Are there any questions? Nope. Seeing none, we're going to go on to the Trustee Chin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make an amendment on the report that the committee members, we do have designated trustees and the superintendent in the committee, but in the report, the committee members is not included. On page 140.
Yeah. Superintendent Hillman?
That is noted, and I can guarantee Trustee Chin and I have been at every meeting. Thanks to Parent Chair Stephanie Slipik, who prepared the report. Yes, they've noted all of the elected parent and community members, and as well, there's a appointed trustee member and superintendent member. I'm wondering if underneath that, creating confident learners new heading at the top, we redid this if it says Greater Essex staff and it lists you and I, but absolutely correct that this does not list you and I as members. Thank you.
Chin, do you have a question about the report?
Yeah, I just have a supplemental. I want to thank Trustee Hillman for all his endeavor for the work. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else on the report? No? Next, we have the Climate Action Plan. Oh, Trustee McKinley, did you have a question on GECPIC?
No, not on GECPIC.
Oh.
I'm ready for climate
Okay,
action plan.
climate action. Going to let us have the presentation first?
Oh, I didn't know there was
No.
a full presentation. I thought we just
Is
got
there
the
a
report.
presentation?
Okay,
You
great.
have the, yes, Superintendent Armstrong.
Sorry, just very briefly, this has been a labor of love that we have worked on for an awfully long time. And Ms. Hinchliff, who you all know is our manager of facility services, and Rachel Bondi, who is the board's environmental and energy officer, is with us today. And I just wanted to, first of all, thank them because it's just been a tremendous amount of work. And I was wondering if maybe Rachel would just like to speak just briefly to the report, since it was, like I said, it's a labor of love.
Yes, we'd love to hear what you have to say about the report. Go ahead.
Perfect. So thank you, Shelley, for the introduction. As she mentioned, my name's Rachel Bondi, and I am the Energy and Environmental Officer with the Greater Essex County District School Board. On behalf of my coworkers and also the entire Climate Action Plan Committee, we first and foremost want to say thank you because I know it's been a very busy evening filled with meetings. So we appreciate you guys making some time to allow us to speak about our Climate Action Plan. Also, as Shelley mentioned, this work is the culmination of a lot of consultation, critical assessment, in-house initiatives, and partnerships with external stakeholders that was really accelerated by the declaration of our climate emergency in February of last year. So this plan, which falls under the strategic pillar of demonstrating ethical stewardship, is a resource that will help quantify all of our greenhouse gas emissions as it helps to identify the things we do as a school board that have an increased warming effect on the Earth's atmosphere. Considering our place as the largest employer in Windsor-Essex, the impact we have on our student population, the number of buildings we operate, we have a unique responsibility to not only understand our impact, but to mitigate it. So in our report, we walk through an initial exercise in quantifying our greenhouse gas emissions through a process called greenhouse gas accounting. Through this process, we work to identify what are called Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emission sources. Scope 1 are emission sources that are directly created by the day-to-day operations of our sites. So for example, this would be like our natural gas that we use for heating our buildings each day, or the refrigerants that are required for air conditioning. Our Scope 2 are emissions that we purchase. Here, an example would be the electricity that we require for our building's usage each day. And Scope 3 is kind of an other catch-all category. This looks at the emissions that are created from the day-to-day activities. So a really good example of this would be the waste generated at each of our sites every single day. So for the report going forward, this school year was decided to be our baseline year, so we will begin doing the full exercise in September to formally understand what our greenhouse gas footprint looks like as a school board. So as part of our first iteration of this report, a big undertaking was the community consultation piece. We met with IEC, our Indigenous Education Advisory Council. We met with GECPIC, our Greater Essex County Parent Involvement Committee. We met a couple of times with Student Senate. Hi to both of you today. And then we also circulated a climate action plan survey to all who have a role at the board. So specifically, when we focus in on the climate action plan survey, we looked to better understand what people felt was important to include in the plan. We asked general knowledge questions about our internal policies because we wanted to gauge not only interest but awareness. And we requested feedback on developing a mission statement that would act as our North Star for the report going forward. So all of this work led us to our finalized mission statement, which I will now read. So the Greater Essex County District School Board recognizes and embraces the unique responsibility of school boards to support staff, students, and school communities in learning about and practicing global sustainability. The board is committed to protecting the environment and inspiring all in the community to embrace environmental stewardship, which includes efforts to refuse, rethink, reduce, reuse, and recycle. Reflecting in our role in preserving the environment and our duty to protect the planet for current and future generations, the board will minimize its global impact through ongoing sustainability measures and provide educational learning opportunities. As we progress through the document, you'll see that we've included several action steps. These focus in on 9 areas that came up in our consultation process. So our targets for this round of the report focus in on policy changes, changes to our existing buildings, looking at our new buildings and infrastructure going forward, our energy supply, new waste management initiatives, behavioral change, fleet vehicles, procurement, and another area that we're calling complementary opportunities, which right now includes things like our active transport committee and renewable energy that exists at some of our building sites. So within our targets, you'll notice that some of these begin as early as the fall of 2023. If approved, this report will be updated each June so that as we progress, we can evaluate whether we're seeing measurable change. The goal is that as we continue down the road of continuous improvement, we'll have more detail in understanding our scope 3 as it's more broad and not directly tied to what we can control within our energy usage. The big thing that we're hoping to continue recognizing and moving forward as a board is that climate change is coming, it's here, and we believe that this climate action plan, as submitted for trustee review, will help better prepare for our future.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions of the report? Trustee McKinley?
Thank you. It's a very full report, lots in it. Thank you. Specifically to this back section, Energy Conservation and Demand Management Plan 2019 to 23. I was wondering, at page 12 and then subsequent pages after that, there's several charts that seem to only go up to 2017-18 year. And I guess I was kind of hoping that there would be some updates, more recent, like not this year, obviously it's not finished, but the previous year, what those numbers would look like, because we don't seem to have those in these charts. And that's what I was most interested in seeing. That was just my comment, my question all in one. Thank you.
Did it make a difference that schools were closed for 2 years? I don't know.
Through you, Madam Chair. So the interesting thing about the appendix is the appendix was a legal obligation. So the Green Energy Act 10 years ago requires any public body, broader public sector entity, to publish their utility usage annually. So we do that every July 1st. and requires us to publish an energy conservation and demand management plan every 5 years. So the one that's in the appendix is the second one you've seen, and in 2018, whatever the date is, when we brought it to the board, or 2019, that you approved it at that time. We did not revisit it every year, and we just used those goals and those targets for those 5 years. So 2 years ago, the Green Energy Act was repealed, and it was replaced with a similar entity under the Electricity Act that requires us to publish an energy conservation and demand management plan with very specific requirements on or before July 1st of 2024. So there's a year gap right now. So when we come back in a year, we're going to align the climate action plan, the energy conservation demand management plan, and then you'll see all those numbers that you're looking forward to seeing. Does that help?
That helps a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Burgess.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Earlier, when we had our budget consultation and, meeting and approval, we talked about the in-year deficit elimination plan, and one of the things was to implement climate action efficiencies to reduce expenses, such as utilities. So is there a prioritization beyond what is mentioned in here as far as like what's up for schedule? Is there something that you're thinking of doubling down or introducing quickly?
Through you, Madam Chair. We've been looking at facility services. We've been looking at energy efficiency for eons. We started back in 1990 when I first joined facility services. And now it is a standard that we look at the most energy efficient, cost effective design when we go through a school. So the school condition improvement monies that we've received in the last 6-7 years has allowed us, because they've been such large amounts, has allowed us to deal with the immediate potential failures. And now we're starting to look at things that are really helping reduce energy usage. So we used to look at boilers. So I don't replace a steam boiler with steam boilers because steam boilers are very inefficient. I replace steam boilers with hot water boilers and change the entire school to hot water heating. It's more comfortable for the occupants and it uses a lot less energy. When we look at roofing, we make sure that we put X number of insulation on the roof so that we save energy. Now we're getting to the point where we're able to look a great example of what we did with school condition improvement money was our change in 3 or 4 years from T8 lights to LED lights. That had a significant reduction in our utility usage. And now we're starting to look at things like new windows, caulking, masonry, and trying to tighten the building envelope. One of the challenges has been, unfortunately, COVID. COVID required us, and still requires us to a certain extent, to run our ventilation systems longer, to run our ventilation systems with as much fresh air as possible, and to use MERV 13 filters. So as soon as we were very tight with how often or how long we ran our ventilation systems. So now they're running almost double the time that they were running before, with a lot more fresh air being introduced or outdoor air being introduced into the schools. That has taken a significant impact on our usage of natural gas. The war between Russia and Ukraine has had a significant impact on the budget for natural gas, and it just goes on and on, right? The closure of plants, nuclear plants, is having a significant. But we in facility services in the board have worked really hard to try to minimize consumption, and we're still barely holding the costs. And in some cases, we're not. But at least we're avoiding the consumption. So that's what we've been doing for 20 years.
At least 20. Yeah, yeah. Any
I'll
questions?
have a second question when my turn.
Any questions over here? Nope, then your second question, trustee Burgess.
It's on page 51 and repurposing furniture and equipment. Generally, as it says here, as new schools are constructed, construction budgets have typically allocated an amount for new furniture. You know, we just went to North Star, we see all new furniture. So can I tell my friends in Kingsville that the policy has changed and that when the new school opens, according to this, 23-24, that we are going to have repurposed and utilize surplus furniture and equipment where available and in good condition. So that it's not going to be all new equipment, it's going to be the first school that has kind of a mix.
Still depends on the condition, but Ms. Hinchcliffe, go ahead.
No, Superintendent Armstrong.
Oh, sorry, Superintendent Armstrong.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. When we went to the ministry to require additional funding to build that school, which we did receive, part of the request required that the board restrict a certain amount of its accumulated surplus in order to pay for the furniture, new furniture and equipment for that school. So we have restricted a portion of accumulated surplus, so they would obviously receive replenishment of new items. But certainly we are looking at schools. Honestly, if you went into Giles campus, there is a lot of things in there that really are in great shape that you wouldn't know otherwise. But certainly the intent is to put new in that school.
When you say Giles campus, that's where we store, yeah, not just what was left over at Giles. Okay.
That's our storage location. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, moving on to the chair's report. First, I'd like to acknowledge that trustees this week and next week are probably busy with dates for school graduations. It happens to be that time of year, and graduations are always a wonderful opportunity to celebrate. For grade 8, it means that they're moving on to a great big chapter in their life to move on to high school. And when the graduations happen from grade 12, it means that we've been successful, I think, in doing our work as a school system to ensure that these young people get their secondary school diploma. So I hope that you're all having opportunities to attend the school graduations, and our best wishes to all the graduates for a safe and happy summer and whatever brings to them for September. I hope they're all ready to go. I'd also like to acknowledge that we have some significant retirements, and one of them happens to be Superintendent Jeff Hillman. After recently receiving his 30-year service pin with our board, seems that Jeff is leaving us again. The first time that you left us, it was for a secondment with the Ministry of Education, and we were very happy to welcome your return. But it seems at this time, however, that may not be the case. So you'll be leaving us for your much-deserved retirement. And on behalf of all the trustees, we sincerely wish you all the best. And then it's no secret that our Director of Education is also retiring after serving the past 10 years with the Greater Essex County District School Board. So she will very soon be moving on to the new chapter in her life called retirement. And I would just like to point out that prior to coming here, Erin devoted 28 years to her career in education. And I think for her to make that decision to come here for her last 10 years was a very courageous move on her part, to leave a community that she was familiar with, to leave family and friends, to come to a whole new environment where she had to establish a home and get to know her school community and make new friends and and learn her way about the Greater Essex County District School Board. I thought that was a very courageous move on your part, and I think it worked out very well for yourself as well as us. And I also wanted to point out that she was the second female to hold the distinction of being the Director of Education for our board. We did have a brief interim with another woman, but in terms of being the Director of Education, there was just Mary Jean Gallagher and yourself. And I think that that again was another reason to say that that was a courageous move on your part. I regret that you had to endure the chaos of COVID in your last few remaining years, but I think that having navigated that, I think it makes retirement look even better as an alternative. So on behalf of all the trustees, I would like to thank you sincerely for your service to our board and wish you all the best moving forward. Thank you. Okay, now we're at trustee question period. Do we have any questions? Yep, trustee Nelson?
Yes, I had parents reach out to me from Hugh Beaton, and they understand that there's some construction that's going to be taking place on their windows. And so they're curious to know if they could have an update as to whether or not their windows are being repaired at Hugh Beaton and if they're going to look as beautiful as the ones at Walkerville.
Yeah, thank you. I'll ask Ms. Hinchliff to answer that.
Go ahead.
Thank you for the question. The short answer is yes. Yeah, they are. We've been working with the City of Windsor Heritage officer to make sure we get windows that mimic the originals. So there's some significant work happening at Hugh Beaton. The principal is fully aware and is attending site meetings every 2 weeks. It's very disruptive to the school, but in the end, it'll be a beautiful building. So if I would encourage you to have the parents call the principal, she can give them a blow by blow.
Thank you. It's interesting to me that you tagged on there that they be as beautiful as Walkerville, the new windows that they ended up putting in at Walkerville. Just recently, Walkerville celebrated 100 years, and I was there as an alumni with my brother, who also graduated from Walkerville, and he and I were walking around the building, and he said, "Wow, look at these new windows. They're really awesome." Well, maybe that's a guy thing. I didn't even notice them. But so I just thought it was interesting that you tagged that on, that they'd be as beautiful as Walkerville, because, yeah, yeah, no. So that's good. That's good that we appreciate the new windows. Thank you for that question. Are there any others? No? Okay, notices of motion for the next meeting in September. Trustee McKinley.
At the next regularly scheduled meeting of the board in September, I will move that a new policy and regulation be created regarding progressive discipline and termination process.
Thank you. Any other notices of motion? I thought I saw a hand over here. No? Thank you. You give that to Madame Leboeuf, please. Trustee McKinley. Yeah, you'll give it. Yes, yeah. Okay. Thank you. Do we have any announcements for this meeting? Oops. No? Seeing none, I will declare the meeting adjourned as we've come to the end of our agenda, but I would remind trustees that we are going back into private session. Thank you. And wishing everybody a wonderful summer. This is our last regular meeting of the school year, and we will be back in action in September. Thank you.